Death in the Sun by Adam Creed. Read by Jonathan Oliver. The Alpujarras. I was a stone and lost my centre, and was thrown into the sea, and after a very long time I came to find my centre again. Traditional Song. Part 1. Chapter 1. Jadis Golding pauses on the corner, finds a shadow and checks his watch. For an instant, its indigo and bejewelled dial makes him feel good about himself, but then he remembers the price it came at. He looks from the time to the sky and sees a leaf falling. The trees are heavy with leaves, and he knows that if he catches the leaf, then luck will come to him. He could do with it. He holds out his hand, spreading his fingers. Then he sees Brandon, walking slow with his hands plunged deep down the front of his shorn paws. Jadis closes his hand into an empty fist. The leaf is on the ground. Jadis runs a few steps to keep Brandon in sight. He pauses when Brandon pauses to let the traffic go, crosses when Brandon crosses. They proceed in this ill-tailored tandem all the way up to Spitalfields, and all the way the Limekiln estate comes in and out of view like an island in a high sea. This makes his blood sluice. He is so close to Jasmine and Millie, but cannot call on his lover and their daughter. The streets thicken, and suits mix with jeans. Some are frocks with salwar kameez. Brandon slows, turns into the entrance to the market, and stops. Jadis immediately recognizes the man he is talking to, which gives him plenty of cause for concern. Brandon, so long a friend, has been in hiding since he was shortlisted for the manslaughter of a 19-year-old student who happened to be crossing the road in the aftermath of a job on the Seven Sisters Road. So why is he talking to a policeman? A Cherokee jeep slows up, and Brandon nods at it, makes a circle in the air with his finger, and carries on talking to D.S. Pulford. As the Cherokee cruises towards him, its windows blacked out, Jadis pulls his beanie hat down. He gives the Limekiln Tower a long last look and slopes into Flower and Dean Street, drawing shapes of what he will have to do if Pulford doesn't get off his case. He scrolls through his phone, sees the name is still there. Staffe, work. Staffe, mobile. He deletes one, and then the other, but knows that this particular policeman will always be there, everywhere he goes. Chapter 2. Slowly, he realizes that he is not dead. He is accustomed to this process, but lately it has been complicated by the fact that gunshot awakens him. Birds flap up into the walnut tree, scared by Paco the Frog's automated gun crow. The pillows are wet on his neck, and the sheets are knotted around his ankles. His fever comes and goes, but it has been on the wane this last week. Tomorrow his friend Manolo is taking him to the hospital in Almeria, where they will hopefully appraise his healed wound a final time. They will chastise him for rushing his rehab, but this latest setback will be his last, he promises himself. The ceiling is high, and the poplar beams are varnished. The house martins circle in the pale morning. Beyond the fringe of silver chains, hanging by the open door to keep the mosquitoes away, the low sun is becoming brilliant. It seems that winter will never come. Near, mules clatter down the cobbled track that runs by his rented house and into the campo. The sweetness of Frog's black tobacco swirls up through the leaves of the walnut tree. He pushes himself upright in the bed and touches his soreness. It is less tender than yesterday. This time he must let it heal completely, stay free from infection. Frog calls to his dog, and Staffe walks across his bedroom's terracotta floor, warm already, and parts the silver chain cortinas, blinking. Beyond the walnut tree, wisps of cloud strand the sky, and the massif of Gador is far away, between him and Almeria. Tomorrow, Manolo has promised him lunch at his Tio's bar, an Almerian institution, so he claims. Staffe picks his phone from the crude chestnut dressing table and looks for messages. Not a sausage. How his stomach pines for sausage, the English way. A line of men lean against the thick oak counter of Bar Fuente, arguing fiercely and banging fists. Some wear broad-rimmed straw hats, check shirts and drill trousers tied at the waist with rope. Others, younger, are in blue cotton overalls and baseball caps, sporting the logos of local plumbing and electrical suppliers. In front of them, on the bar, are rows of tiny white cups and saucers with ferocious coffee, alongside small goblets filled to their brims with soli sombra, a breakfast tipple of brandy and anise. Staffe makes his way to the Commodore, and the locals nod and smile. He says to Consuela, "The usual," and she smiles sheepishly, her eyes darting to the floor. Staffe chides Frog for setting his gun crow too early in the morning. Frog pushes back his dog-eared beret, says something indecipherable in reply, then looks Consuela up and down. She has a broad face. Her bones are fine, and she's taller than most of the men. She's not from these parts, but for some reason has stuck around. Perhaps it has something to do with the child she has. She didn't arrive in Almagen with the child. Frog says something else at her and laughs, like a frog, his big eyes bulging. She scuttles into the kitchen. As he waits, Staffe looks at some new posters on the wall. They are handwritten in an ornate font with renditions of paintbrushes, books, and musical notes as a border. The posters are all slightly different, but each advertises a final decisive meeting with the junta to determine whether Almagen will be awarded its cultural academy. It has been the talk of the village. It will revitalize the place, secure its future. Bar Fuente, like Staffe's house, is in the lower barrio, the oldest part of the village. The Moors built it in the 16th century when they were banished from Granada. Later, the village spread up the hill towards what became a main road, the Carretera. Each barrio has a square and a fountain. In these parts, where the melting snow from the Sierra Nevada flows, water is priceless. Consuela brings Staffe his tostada with tomato and olive oil, a glass of orange juice, and café con leche. "Hey, Grilli," says Manolo, picking up a soli sombra, coming to join him. As he brushes past Consuela, Frog says something, and Manolo blushes. "Guiri," calls another. "No, Guillermo, you idiot." It's Manolo's joke, to shorten Guillermo, the Spanish for William, to Guilli. A Guiri is an outsider, implicitly unwelcome. "They are idiots," says Manolo, plonking down a plastic bag on the floor and sitting heavily on the chair opposite Staffe, his torso broad and deep, as if he's not to scale. He nods and smiles at Staffe. His teeth are white and good, odd in these parts, but his skin is dark as stained oak and rough from the sun and the Sierra winds. Manolo is the village shepherd, El Pastor, and probably a few years younger than Staffe, but the ravages of the sun and wind make him seem older. Frog calls him a stupid goat. Someone else calls him a goat fucker. Manolo ignores them, hurt, but seeming as though he has heard it all before. The lines on his forehead deepen, and his shoulders hunch an extra degree. He says, "Tomorrow, Almeria. You are still good to go," as though apologizing for something. "Of course," says Staffe. Frog shouts across, "Ah, here, your brother is back, the one who got all the brains." Manolo pushes the bag towards Staffe with his foot. "Tomatoes and peppers from my huerta." He swirls his soli sombra, the goblet like a thimble in his enormous hands. "Show my friend here your hole," calls Frog, imploring Staffe with his wide, bulging eyes. A cluster of the men from the bar turn, urging him, and Staffe reluctantly lifts his shirt. He's done this a dozen times, but he manages a smile. One of the younger men comes across, tipping back his baseball cap, crouching, prodding the baby-pink tissue of his 2 scars. The one between his hip and the navel has healed well, but the other, between his heart and the pit of his arm, weeps, having reopened a month ago when a bigoted chump from Messina, the next village, had started on Manolo. Staffe stepped in, and so did the chump's friends. Strong as Manolo is, they took quite a hiding. He swallows away the memory of where the 2 bullets came from, how long it has been since the doctors at City Royal cheated death, saved the fugitive Jadis from becoming a murderer. It seems a lifetime ago now. Today he will do his physio and spend an hour brushing up on his conjugations. Then he will meet his young nephew Harry from school. They will walk up the mountain together to El Nido, his sister Marie's cotijo, where she lives with the ne'er-do-well Paolo. Meanwhile, he and Manolo sit together. Slowly the bar thins out. Staffe says to his friend, "Your brother? You never mentioned a brother." "He went away. He is barely anything to me." "Wouldn't it be nice to have some family with you, especially with your father away? The family line is what we call it." "Some families are maybe best without a line." Frog bangs an empty glass on the counter, shouts something thick and fast to Consuela, who is in the kitchen. The other old goat still at the bar laughs, but Consuela looks hurt, and Manolo stands slowly. Consuela shouts, "No, Lolo, no!" Manolo walks towards Frog, who says, "Sit down, you thick lump." Manolo reaches out with a big hand, and Frog's friend grabs his forearm, but Manolo gets Frog by the throat anyway, launches him into the wall with one hand around his throat. Frog's beret falls to the ground, and his feet twitch in the air. Manolo puts his free hand to his hip, where Staffe sees the carved handle of a knife protruding from a plaited makeshift belt fashioned from baling twine. Staffe shouts, "No!" as the colour drains instantly from Frog's face. Salva, the bar owner, rushes in from the storeroom, throws himself at Manolo, grabbing him round the neck. But Manolo stands firm and still, and Frog's feet twitch. He squeals, high-pitched, like air from a balloon. Consuela walks through the hatch at the end of the bar and puts a fine hand on Manolo's massive, taut forearm. She whispers, "Please, let him go. For me." Frog drops to the floor, like a sack of beans from a mule. Manolo returns to the table, his eyes empty and cold. He reaches for his hip and pulls his knife, cuts open a tomato, and offers a slice to Staffe. "My tomatoes are the best." The knife has a goat's head, intricately carved for its handle. Seeing Staffe looking, Manolo says in his little voice, "I carved it myself." Staffe nods at the posters. Says you could get involved in the academy. "That's not for us. This lot just want to make off with the money from the government. One man's culture, another man's crime." He runs his blade through another tomato, and Consuela brings him a plate of bread. They don't look at each other, nor exchange even pleasantries. Staffe finds slim shade by the church in the middle barrio. He presses his back to the stone, which is warm. A couple of mothers stand by the fountain watching their young play. The bells peal, and before the final ring echoes around the fringe of houses, the children rush through the arched filigree gate of the school cloister and into the square. The mothers call out to their young, but are ignored. A nun brings a lone child to the ironwork gate. She pats him on the shoulder and points up the mountain, ushering him away. Harry looks sad, and Staffe calls out to him. Harry's face lights up when he hears his name, but becomes instantly glum. He walks towards his uncle briskly, head down. "I can walk home on my own." Staffe raises a bag. "I have tomatoes and peppers from Manolo's huerta." "His garden, you mean?" Harry walks off up the steep, narrow alley that leads to the main road. At the top of the hill, he drinks lustily from a fountain. When Staffe catches up, Harry holds his uncle's hand, and they cross the Methina road, take the goat track into the Sierra. "You don't know how lucky you are living here," says Staffe. "Why can't I stay with you in the village?" "Your mum and Paolo live up the mountain, and you have a new brother or sister about to come along." "There's nothing to do up there." "What about the baby?" "It'll only make things worse. You know how small that house is." Staffe wants to tell him that he will look back on these days and marvel. "You can learn the land. And you should ask your friends up to El Nido. You can make a camp and have them to sleep over." Harry looks up at Staffe as if he is deciding whether to confide a secret. He says nothing. They walk briskly for 20 minutes, Staffe suffering in the heat. But when they reach the cortijo, Harry runs past the building, sits on the edge of the balsa, a circular concrete pond that holds water for the land and for washing. Normally his feet dangle in the water, but not today. Marie is chopping peppers outside the stone cortijo, which has a kitchen-cum-living room and a small bedroom either side. The shower is outside, and the toilet is wherever takes your fancy. Paolo started on the building work with a vengeance, but as summer hotted up, his mission soon petered out into long afternoons sat on the veranda, smoking his way through his own supply, and drinking the local Terrano wine that comes by the 5-litre. Marie fries the peppers, adds beaten eggs to a skillet, and rustles up a revuelta. They eat and drink and watch the shadowless enormity of the valley. Paolo talks about what he has planted and how it's hit and miss, but next year will be better. Staffe thinks, yeah, right, mañana, but says, "What would you do in the winter for fuel? The locals have started bringing in their wood." "We'll do it when it gets cooler," says Paolo. "Well, surely when it gets cooler, you'll already be needing it." Paolo says, "They've thrown the towel in." "What?" says Staffe. "Can't we let our lunch settle?" says Marie, gathering the dishes and looking daggers at Paolo. "We're away from the world here. That's supposed to be the point." "Who's thrown the towel in?" asks Staffe. Marie takes the dishes away, and as soon as she's out of earshot, Paolo says, "I saw it on the telly in Ojiva. It's ETA. They have stopped for good. Staffe watches Marie at the sink by the door, scrubbing the skillet. When she's done with the pan, she fills a bowl for the dishes, starts singing a Pretenders song. She has a beautiful voice. He says to Paolo, "If Marie didn't want you to say anything, you shouldn't have said anything." "But she says you're—" He lets the words drift to nothing. Staffe goes to Marie, says, "Sing that song again. What is it?" She removes the muslin from a cheese that Manolo had brought round last week. "He told you, didn't he?" "What's it matter?" "It matters. That's the problem." "It'll be winter soon. You can't shower outside in the winter." He kisses her on the forehead and starts to dry the dishes. Marie sings, "Though you are far away, I know you'll always be near to me." She cuts a slice of cheese, reaches out to Staffe with a piece, pops it in his mouth. It conjures a memory. She must see it, because she says, "I feel it too, you know. Will, I miss them badly. But you can't get angry. That won't do any good. And surely, if ETA are stopping, well, that has to be good." He chews on the cheese, and she leans against him, rests her head on his chest, her ear pressing against his wound. He feels the pain, lets it come, thinks about the heartless bastard who killed their parents. Santi Echebatteria, who, it seems, is allowed to see the error of his ways and put an end to bad activity. Just like that. Does that make their death even more worthless? Though the cause is no longer fought. It's madness to think that way, he knows. Marie holds up a slice of cheese, says, "This is good. Remember when Mum would tell you off for eating it straight from the fridge?" He smiles, remembers how his teeth would leave their imprint in the waxy cheddar, always catching him out. "This is Manolo's cheese." "You were laid up when he brought it round. He came with his brother." "I didn't know he had a brother," says Marie. "Nobody tells you anything up here," says Staffe. The setting sun catches Gador and brushes it pink and coral. Tomorrow, Manolo is going to take him towards it, but veering to the west, to where Almeria stands by the Med, like a proud Moor looking back at Africa. Staffe rocks in his wooden chair up on the roof of his village house, puts down Monsignor Quixote, and swirls the mint tea in its nickel pot. He pours himself another glass, thinking back to when he had only a notion of Spain. The three of them were waiting for the last call for boarding the ferry. His father was sporting his Panama hat and wore a silly Hawaiian shirt. His mother had a floral summer dress that floated from its empire line, and her face was sun-kissed from the hot June. 25 years ago. Yet sometimes it feels like never, or as if it happened to someone else. Other times, it seemed like yesterday, the only thing of significance that ever touched him. "Well," his mother had said, "you'll be—" "All right," he'd snapped. There was a party back up in Surrey, and in his pocket he was touching the joint he had rolled ready for the drive back up the A3. "Well," his father said wearily, "we know you'll be all right, but one day you'll understand." "I understand now." "And you'll be good to Marie?" His mother had pulled down her hat too far on her head, and she tilted her face up, peered at him. He waited for her to admonish him, but she just reached out and put a finger to his lips, said, "I don't know what I would do if anything happened to you, Will." He should have said then that he loved her. He should have said that to his father, too, Instead, he looked up at the pride of Bilbao and said, "They're boarding." He accepted the handshake from his father and stood limply as his mother hugged him. There were gulls in the sky and a faraway look in her eye. He waited for her to kiss him, but she didn't. She just put the palm of her hand flat to his chest and said, "My boy." The next time he saw her, her freckles were gone and her eyes were closed. They had pulled a gown right up to her neck, and when he looked down there wasn't the contour you would expect. They had put her hair up in a bun, in a way she'd never had it. She was all gone. Chapter 3. Manolo stoops at the counter of the Quinta Toro, bending low so his elbow can rest on the bar. He is talking with his tío, Angel, and raises his hand the instant Staffe steps down from the blistering sun of Almeria's market and into the dark, empty bar. His smile is frail, and his eyes are soft, but he is undoubtedly pleased to see Staffe, almost as if he has been counting the moments towards a loved one's safe return. Approaching Manolo now, Staffe sees his friend in a different kind of light. He's wearing a jacket for his trip to town, and his trousers are clean with a sharp crease. His shoes shine, and his skin sings from a good scrubbing. Today his friend is almost dashing. But he is stiff, as if broom handles are stuck down the arms and legs of his clothes. "Papas a la pobre," says Manolo, thrusting a saucerful of glistening potatoes at him. "The best. And how are things with you?" Manolo looks at Staffe's chest, his face sad again. He holds Staffe by the shoulder as he awaits the response. "I'm fine. The hospital said I'm fit to travel." "You are going home? To England?" The consultant had told Staffe his blood had tested well, but he wouldn't be able to work for at least a month, though he could travel, best not by air. "I might go back in a couple of weeks or so." Manolo looks glum. "Good for you, but bad for us." He turns away, issues a rally of fast, blurring words, and Angel glugs a glassful of wine into a goblet. Angel is older than Staffe, his forehead crinkled with lines and, unusually for a Spaniard, his head totally hairless, gleaming. They clash drinks, and Manolo tells him how long the Quinta Toro has been in the family, and how proud they all are that Angel has kept it going, the old way. But the bar is empty. Its history looks spent. Angel brings small dishes of chicken livers in rich gravy. Manolo tells Angel, "This is my friend, Nigradia from England." Staffe nods. "Police. More like the Cuerpo Nacional, though."
"He is a detective,"
says Angel, looking suspiciously at Staffe, then Manolo.
"Maybe I should take my other on our way home."
Why?" says Staffe. Angel talks impossibly fast, the words blurring into one another, and as he talks he reaches down, produces more wine and pours it lustily, the wine spilling onto the counter. Manolo puts a finger to his temple and taps it, nodding at Angel. He says to Staffe, "We have our own mysteries here. A murder." Angel leans forward, lowers his voice.
"This one is a guiri, is nothing."
"His son, Jesus, is in the Cuerpo," says Manolo. "He's down at the scene."
"He's only a young puppy dog, but he has seen many, many deaths already," says Angel. "This is no different."
"But he told me it is the worst," says Manolo.
"How?"
says Staffe. Angel shakes his head, which glints from the lantern lights above. He is suddenly earnest.
"I cannot betray his confidence."
He raises a finger to his lips. "I can take you, though," says Manolo. "A shame not to whet your appetite."
"You should leave Jesus to his business," says Angel.
Staffe slides a spoonful of livers into his mouth, presses his tongue to the roof of his mouth, and the livers dissolve, leave a taste of something unmistakably foreign. "What is this spice?" he asks Angel.
"A secret,"
says Angel. And Staffe gets it. Something you seldom taste in Spain. This is star anise, a cousin of fennel and the anise liqueur they swill for breakfast. On their way out, Manolo says, "So, that's my tío." He looks back at the bar. 2 large barrels out front and an ancient sign beneath a weathered bronze bull's head. "What did you make of him?"
"He's a proud man."
Manolo puts his arm on Staffe's back, pats his shoulder firmly.
"I am pleased. I value your opinion. You know that, don't you?"
As they drive to Adra, Manolo's dog, Suki, constantly yaps and jumps from the footwell onto his lap and back again. But Manolo is expressionless, seems elsewhere. Staffe says, "Is something wrong?"
"Wrong?"
Manolo shrugs. They pass a restaurant, El Marisco, on its own opposite the field of vast plastic greenhouses that spill down to the sea. The restaurant is like an oasis, with beautiful Cordobés tiles. A line of Mercs and 4x4s are parked out front. Waiters in starched white tunics and slick black hair tend the great and the good with straight backs and silver service. A man at the top of the steps meets and greets. He clocks Manolo's van and waves, but Manolo ignores him. Staffe says, "Angel said it was a guiri."
"A guiri like me?"
"You shouldn't think of yourself as a guiri. You live here. You have family who have moved here."
"They say if you've been a guiri, you're always a guiri."
Staffe knows that Manolo's father, the one they say is mad and lives in Granada, went to Germany. They say he found himself a beautiful wife who deserted him, destroyed him, gave him a guiri son, or 2. "How do you feel?"
"I am from Almagen. I wish I wasn't, but I am. God willing, that will be the end of it for us Canos."
Manolo pulls Suki onto his lap, fusses with the dog's fluffy white head. For a moment, disregarding the scale of him, Manolo looks free as a boy. Staffe wants to ask Manolo if his mother went off and took his younger brother with her, the brother he's never mentioned. He waits for Manolo to say something.
"You have your sister and your Ari. It's a good family to have."
"I'll tell you about my family one day." Manolo puts a hand under Suki's body, lifts her up and kisses the top of her head. He places her down gently between himself and Staffe.
"It's all right, Gwili. I know about your parents. I am very sorry."
He stops the van. Plastic greenhouses are everywhere, some the size of football pitches. This is intensive farming on an epic scale. Some of the greenhouses are new, but most are decrepit. Dirty plastic sheets full of holes and tied to rusting metal frames. The sand blows up from the track, and as he gets out of the van, Staffe can smell that they are near the sea. He looks into one of the greenhouses where the soil is like dust and sprinklers lie like snakes amongst the canes. He can't recall ever having told Manolo about his parents, but doesn't ask. Instead says, "What grows here?"
"Whatever you want, whenever you want it, but the land is shit. Not like my huerta, with my goat shit and the Sierra water.
Where is Jesus? Manolo points down a narrow track between the plastic structures. You had best be quick.
You're not coming?
I need to collect something. Once he is out of Manolo's battered grey van, the heat intensifies, shimmering off the plastic sheets. Even with his sunglasses on, Staffe has to squint against the glare. A chemical smell of unnatural nutrients mixes with the ozone. Staffe walks past a chest-high drum that says Nitrophos. He goes deep between the giant enclosures, and here and there Moroccans mooch in ones and twos, some in hooded burnous, others in garish nylon tracksuits. Some exude menace, watching him carefully. When Staffe looks back for Manolo's van, a Moroccan, crouched on his haunches and wearing a hemp burnous, dyed yellow and blue, is staring at him. The hood is down, and his eyes are heavy as pebbles. His shaven head is smooth as wet rocks and black as a Bible. As he turns a corner, he senses that the man stands. Turning, he sees Manolo standing beside the Moroccan, holding an empty Hessian sack. Manolo ushers Staffe on with a flutter of the fingers and crouches beside the Moroccan. Once Staffe is right in amongst the plastic, there are no points of reference. The sun is immediately above, and even mighty Gador is nowhere to be seen. He keeps checking for the sea, sees a thin blue strip of it every now and again as he works his way left and forward, right and forward, all the time committing his moves to memory. Staffe discerns human noise, a crackle of radio. He follows the sounds, coming from within a plastic-sheeted greenhouse right down near the sea. By its entrance, a Cuerpo Nacional officer leans against a quad bike. He is strapped up with a revolver and a lethal truncheon. His uniform is blue, and he is handsome, with slicked hair and bright eyes, his skin the colour of walnut. He gives Staffe a lingering look, not blinking. When Staffe gets to within 6 feet, the policeman says, "Stop!" "Where is the beach?" Staffe asks. The policeman laughs. "Beach? This is no beach." Staffe walks by, stands on the low shelf of scrub overlooking 30 metres of sand and wooden pallets and tin cans. Shopping bags flutter in the breeze. If life was this beach, you'd top yourself. He turns. "You're right," trying to see into the ramshackle greenhouse. Inside, makeshift pinboards have been erected, and an enormously fat man with a rush of curly brown hair walks slowly around a penned area, peering at the ground. His shirt is stained dark with sweat all down its back, and in patches beneath each arm the size of dinner plates. "What happened?" The young Cuerpo says, "You shouldn't be here." "What are they growing?" "Strawberries, but not anymore. Are you German?" "Are you Jesus?" "You have a look of your father, Angel. He's a friend of mine." "My father doesn't care for Germans." "I'm English." Jesus' lip curls as if Staffe had said, "I'm a war criminal." Staffe takes a step closer, trying to see the subject of attention inside the greenhouse. Jesus puts a hand to his hip, rubs his thumb against the butt of his revolver, poking from its holster. "Stop!" The fat man looks up, makes his way wearily to the entrance. "Who is he, Jesus?" Staffe says, "I have a house in the Alpujarras." "You're no Alpujarreno. Your Spanish is too clean." The two men laugh. "What happened?" "You must go." The fat man reaches behind him, pulls out a radio. "Jesus, take him away." Staffe jumps away from Jesus and waves his hands in front of his face, shouts, "Wasp! Wasp! I'm allergic! I'm allergic!" The fat man and Jesus each take a step back, and Staffe carves great swipes in the air at the imaginary wasp, focusing on the scene behind the fat man. The head and shoulders of a fair-haired man stick up from a hole in the ground. His skin is swollen, blooded and torn, and his nose is askew. Staffe thinks an eye socket is lower than it ought to be. Jesus walks towards Staffe, grabs his arm, leads him away from the entrance, and as they go, Staffe says, "Is it a bad one?" "It'll be in the papers tomorrow." "Oh, don't worry, I know how it goes. I'm in the police in England." Jesus wipes his mouth. "Like I said, read it in the papers." "Well, I could hear it straight from the journalist. There's no law against that, is there?" "Why would you bother?" Jesus looks at him, and for an instant, Staffe thinks the policeman might expect a convincing response. "Well, you've been in those mountains. There's nothing to do if you haven't got a mule." He laughs. "It can't do any harm." Jesus sighs. "How do you know my father?" "Manolo Cano, your primo, is my best friend here in Spain. Tell me about the journalist. Like you say, it'll be in the papers tomorrow." Jesus lowers his voice. "He's with La Lente." He looks over his shoulder. "Now, you need to get yourself back to the hills." Staffe makes his way back through the plastic-sheeted greenhouses, and all the time he feels watched. He turns quickly, thinks he sees the blur of a darting body. A dog, perhaps. He stops dead, listens hard, and thinks he can hear a scuttle. Maybe a snake. He walks on as softly as he can through the dust, and eventually spots the drum of nitrophos, close to where Manolo parked the van. He looks around. No Manolo, nor his van. "Manolo!" he calls, peering all around. 20 metres away, the African in the blue and yellow burnous is still on his haunches and staring right at Staffe. Staffe beckons the African to stand, but he stays put, looking anxious, putting his hands together as if in prayer, rocking back and forth, moving his lips, but saying nothing. "Have you seen a man, my friend, the one with the grey van?" He shakes his head vociferously, looking at his black feet on the white stones. Staffe stands over him. "What happened here?" The African man cowers and clamps a hand over his own mouth. "Tell me." The man removes the hand and says a word with his mouth, but no sound comes. "You are—" Staffe has forgotten the Spanish word for mute, but the man nods. Staffe sits alongside and motions over his shoulder with his thumb towards the sea. "What did happen?" The man pokes a finger into the dust. He works his finger round and round until a hole the size of a fist is made. He reaches into his burnous and pulls out a bottle of water. He puts his open fist into the hole and pours the water into his hand. The hole grows dark, but the water soon disappears, and the soil is light again. "My friend?" The man shakes his head and draws a flattened palm slowly across his own throat. "What?" Staffe stands, thinking about the fair-haired, beaten man with his head and shoulders planted in the Almeria dust. The doctors prescribed against this. "Really? Really, we have to go." Turning, Staffe sees Manolo trudge from between a couple of greenhouses. "Where were you?" Manolo holds up an old sack of seed, barely a quarter full. "The finest pepper seeds in all Andalusia." He laughs weakly.
Now, we must go, quick.
They drive fast, a different way that doesn't take them back past El Marisco. Bordering an enormous verdant gap amongst the plastic, between the motorway and the Med, signs for Golf Tropical have been defaced into the aerosol words of Guerra Golfo. Gulf War, says Staffe.
There is only so much water, says Manolo. Some people think it's better to use it for food than for golf.
Damn fools! Manolo is agitated and chomps away on a mouthful of sunflower seeds, spitting the soft shells out of the window. After a while, he says,
So, did you see anything?
I got a glimpse of the victim. He was in a terrible state. Manolo looks ahead, squinting at the signs for the autopista.
What did he look like?
Fair hair. That's all you could say. The rest of him was a bloody mess. Chapter 4. Staffe leans against the ancient wrought balcony of his room in Almeria's Hotel Catedral. Watches two young gypsy boys kick a football against the massive sand-coloured stones of the cathedral's facade. Old couples promenade through the plaza in their Sunday best. The sun is low, but the evening is sultry, and the merest breath of the Med comes up from Almeria's port. A couple of hours ago, he waved off troubled Manolo and asked the receptionist in the hotel if she could help him catch up with an old friend of his who writes for La Lente.
He uses a pseudonym these days, though,
Staffe had told the receptionist. I don't know what name he goes by, but I know he's covering a murder down on the coast. The receptionist embraced the challenge, phoning La Lente and coming up with the name Gutierrez. Raúl Gutierrez.
That story isn't even out yet, Gutierrez had said when Staffe called.
What I know won't affect the story you're running tomorrow, but it could lead to something bigger, Staffe had said.
This story's big enough, don't you worry.
Murder always is.
Who are you?
I am police.
You talk shit.
Did you interview the African? Asked Staffe.
Which African?
He's mute, but he saw it all.
Nobody saw it. And anyway, this is my story.
Stories of murder aren't yours or mine. They belong to the dead and their families and whoever might be next. Can you meet me? Café Tanger at 8 o'clock?
You sound quite intense, Senor Wagstaff.
Staffe had tried to recall when he might have let slip his name to Raúl Gutierrez. He was quite sure he hadn't. He hung up, knowing that he really had no business with this killing. But if Gutierrez showed up, maybe that was a sign. If he didn't, he would let it lie. Have a good dinner and slide between crisp linen sheets and get a bus tomorrow back to the hills. Mind his own. Now, making his way down through the hotel, then walking down Carrier Real, he feels bubbles of air trap in his belly, a slow rush in his loins. As the cranes of the port come into view and the sun catches the tops of the buildings, he feels kind of weightless. Every so often he sees the battered face of the fair Guiri, his shoulders like a dead tree stump in the ground. What will he do if Gutierrez doesn't show? Since his wound was retreated, Staffe has grown a little stronger every day. But for all those weeks, he has dreaded going back to London and the force, a little more each day. Jadis Golding had looked him in the eye and pulled the trigger, rather than go back to jail. Staffe had done everything he knew to help Jadis get clean. He invested his faith in the young man who had been a criminal since before he went to school. Now, he doesn't know what he will be if he can't go back to the force. But he knows that a policeman needs one thing above all else. Forget courage and method and intelligence. If you lack judgment, your days are numbered. That night, his judgment had failed him. In Café Tanger, a Muslim affair, he orders a mint tea, looks out towards the port. On the other side of the glass, Moroccan men sit in rows facing Africa and stirring their tea, passing the hookah pipe. "Senor Wagstaff." Staffe turns, jolted by the sound of his own name. "Senor Gutierrez?" Raoul Gutierrez nods and lights a black cigarette. "Do you want tea?" Gutierrez shakes his head, sucks on his smoke. "You are a long way from home, Inspector. A long way indeed from your leaden gate home." Raoul sits down. He is 50-ish and clean as a whistling dandy, dressed for the ladies, Staffe thinks, and oozing expensive cologne. "You've done some homework," says Staffe, wondering what Gutierrez has gleaned in the hours since they spoke. He thinks about asking Raoul how he knew his name, but decides to keep that card close. "And you too. Now, tell me about your new African friend." "How do you know he is a new friend?" "Information is my life. It is like the sun and water. Without it, I can't live." Gutierrez motions to the waiter, asks for water. "You nearly died. You should be more careful." When the water comes, Gutierrez waits for the waiter to turn away and takes out a quarter bottle of J&B. Staffe looks anxiously around. Gutierrez says, "I don't mind Africans, but we are in Spain, and if I want to drink whiskey in my own country, I will. They know what is what. I don't know why you said to meet here." "The victim was in a hell of a state," says Staffe. Gutierrez drinks half his whiskey in one, theatrically opening his eyes wide and blowing out his cheeks, smiling. "You saw nothing." In England, a crime scene like that would be crawling with journalists, but you've got an exclusive, right? You should concentrate on your convalescence." The waiter comes across to the table and speaks rapidly to Gutierrez, clearly angry. He scoops up the whiskey bottle and curses. Gutierrez calls the waiter a fucking infidel, and a group of 4 young Moroccans appear from what must be the kitchen at the far end of the café. 2 of them hold chef's knives, and all of them smile, as if Gutierrez might be a big enough shit to make their day. The 4 youths slowly advance, and Staffe holds up his hands. "I apologize for my friend. We shall leave." He puts down a €5 note and ushers Raoul Gutierrez up by the lapel. Raoul Gutierrez says, "There's a proper place around the corner. Come on, I'm buying." Casa Joaquin is 1 block back from the waterfront and populated by men between 40 and 55, all with their hair slicked back, picking at seafood and drinking copas of manzanilla. They stand in clusters and talk passionately about the red shrimp of Almeria, the anchovies and the clams. Most seem to know Gutierrez, who has 2 glasses plonked down for him on the counter where a space is made. "I suggest you get me drunk, Inspector. My tongue loosens. And I might even get to talking about Santi Estebateria." "What?" "It seems I can be all kinds of uses to you. But what can you do for me?" Staffe spears an anchovy, lets the salt make a delicious film in his mouth. He calls for 2 more coppers, still reeling at the sound of the name of the man who murdered his parents. "There were only 3 English killed. It might have been a long time ago, but it's a big thing in Spain still. Paul and Enid Wagstaff. They lie heavy on our conscience, like the memories of our two boys on yours.
Omar, says Staffe.
Gutierrez clinks his glass against Staffe, says, I think you have nothing. In which case, let's get drunk, and tomorrow you can be on your way back to Almachen. Staffe sips his manzanilla, considers the fact that he hadn't told Gutierrez he is living in Almachen. He leans close to Raoul, whispers, He was killed with water, right? Raoul's eyes flicker, and he smiles. What exactly did your African friend say? He drew me a pretty picture. Maybe I should see what you say in your newspaper, and then I'll know how deep you are in the Quepo's pocket. And why should you care, Inspector Wagstaff? He guesses that Raoul has built a career on people underestimating him, thinking he is some played-out libertine. He finishes the sherry and looks at the fish and crustaceans on ice behind the bar. There must be a dozen tapas to be had here. To loosen my tongue. Staffe thinks to himself, that's not on the menu. Not tonight. Raoul must see this, because he puts an arm around Staffe's shoulder. His breath is malty as he says, We are going to get on fine, the two of us. I just know it. He slaps Staffe hard on the back and laughs. Behind the eyes, though, Staffe sees something familiar glinting in the dark. Raoul is afraid. Pulford watches Brandon Latimer leave Pearls. Belat, which is what Brandon goes by, swaggers out of the caff with his hips low and his jeans halfway down his thighs, and as he walks past the window, he winks at Pulford and taps his chest, twice, to signify that he is carrying, and there is nothing that an officer of the law can do about it. Not when you take into account the shenanigans that Pulford is requesting Brandon to perform. Even though he is supposedly in hiding from the likes of Pulford on account of a hit-and-run up on the Seven Sisters Road. D.S. David Pulford puts his head in his hands and sighs, heavy and long. His conscience will wrestle with Belat's guilt later, when he has brought Jadis Golding to justice. He pushes his mug away and leaves enough money to cover his tea and Brandon's can of nourishment. He feels as though this goose chase is getting away from him, and he takes another look at the warrant for arrest he's just shown Brandon. Of all Jadis Golding's E-gang, Belat has most to lose by not fingering Jadis for the shooting of Staffe. Brandon wants his warrant for arrest for the hit-and-run withdrawn on account of a new alibi he has discovered. Pulford told him he couldn't do that, but he would help him remain at large. Brandon had said, You must be a pussy, letting people like us take pops at police. He was your boss, right? He laughed. Proper pussy. I'll have you and your brother for manslaughter. And these conversations, you want that in the open? You couldn't prove anything. Not according to my barrister. You're talking to your barrister. That was when Brandon had got up, looking down on Pulford. You know, they say police was on the Seven Sisters that night. I was supposed to have mowed that poor boy down. Pulford knows where Brandon parked his Cherokee Jeep, and he will know exactly where it will go from now until whenever he finds the tracker. The device is unauthorized. In the eyes of the law, it doesn't exist, but if things work out, it won't be necessary in any court of law. On his way to the lime kiln, Pulford remembers the first time Staffe took him to Pearls. They had ribs, rice and peas, and cornbread. It wasn't Pulford's bag, but Staffe loved it. Staffe's Peugeot is parked up in the lime kiln car park, and Pulford sits on its bonnet, looks up at Jasmine Cash's flat. He waits 10 minutes until she finally comes out on the deck, young Millie on her hip. She shouts down for him to fuck off, which makes him ashamed, because he knows Staffe really like Jasmine. But Pulford figures that if Jadis knows he is harassing his girlfriend, he might come out of the shadows. Also, the more Jadis thinks it's not safe to call on them in his own home, the more he will want to. Pulford gets in the car, starts it up and swings out onto the East Road. He makes his way up Columbia Road, seeing on the small monitor down by his gear stick that Brandon is making his way out on the Roman road towards Stratford. He reaffirms the ethics of his approach, his faith in the many ways the goodness of the law can manifest itself. Chapter 5. Staffe reads Raúl Gutierrez's article, which made the front page of La Lente. He can ascribe sense to most of the words. He's been topping up his Spanish, layering new lumps of nouns and verbs onto his faded memories of the foreign language. Recently, propped up in bed with only cicadas and the slow arc of the sun for distraction, the language has become increasingly clear. He drains the last bottle of soft drink from the minibar and douses his head in cold water again. Last night, he and Raúl went to a peña way out at the top of the Avenida Garcia Lorca, and after the flamenco, they drank with a guitarist friend of Raúl's and went back to Gutierrez's place, an apartment somewhere near Casa Joaquin. But the cubatas had taken their toll, and Staffe had fallen asleep. He was awakened rudely early by the sound of Raúl's snoring, kicking at his temples like a stable full of mules. At dawn he made his way back to the Hotel Catedral, picked up a morning edition of La Lente. He reads Gutierrez's story one more time. Gang execution in the plastic. But who will pay the real price? Yesterday, Almeria saw another example of what happens when money and drugs come together. A foreigner was discovered dead in the intensive farming greenhouses on the coast between Adra and Roquetas del Mar. Tourists on all-inclusive holidays played in the sea and relaxed by swimming pools, drinking Cuba Libres, as a man was viciously murdered. Police are certain the death is related to the importation of drugs from Morocco. The dead man is a white Northern European, and police say that several witnesses saw a group of black men behaving suspiciously in the plastic shortly before the estimated time of the killing. The price we ordinary people will pay for this terrible industry that is staining the city and province of Almeria is that people will choose to go elsewhere for their holidays. It is imperative that we drive these greedy criminals back where they came from, to save our jobs and conserve the tradition of our unique Andalusian way of life. Drug use amongst the young in Spain is already a problem, and we must make it as difficult as we can for our youth to acquire these narcotics. As for the death of another trafficker or dealer, do we really care? Raúl Gutierrez. Staffe tosses the paper into his case and makes his way down to reception, where he orders a 2-litre bottle of water and asks them to find out what time the buses leave for the Alpujarras. As he waits, he considers what Raúl might be up to. His story couldn't have been written any better by the Comisario of Police himself, if he wanted a free-for-all on drug trafficking. And he wouldn't want to be a Moroccan, trapped down there in the plastic on 20 euros a day and taking the blame for all bad things that pass. There is a bus at 12:30, but you have to change at Ogijar. Would you like a taxi to the station, Senor Wagstaff? Yes. The way he feels now, dehydrated and sweating, he thinks he wouldn't care if he never clapped eyes on Gutierrez ever again. Then he recalls that the journalist knew about Santi Estebateria. The bile rises. Guilly! Staffe looks around, seeking out Manolo, wondering what would have brought his friend back to collect him. He scans the Plaza Catedral for his grey van, but sees nothing.
Gwilly!
The call is from a table outside the hotel. Gutierrez is clean-shaven and wearing a crisp lemon shirt and pressed sun-bleached jeans. His hair is slicked back, and he tips Coca-Cola into a tumbler of amber-coloured spirit. He clinks the ice and says, "Something for the ditch before we drive to the mountains." "The mountains?" Staffe swigs from his bottle of water, plonks it on Raoul's table. Fat beads of sweat pop on his scalp. "Like we said last night, it is a year since I was in Almagen, when that English artist died. You know all about him, I suppose." "Hugo Barrington," says Staffe. "It'll be good to go back there." "I read your article." Gutierrez twirls the ice in his glass and drinks it down, taking his time. He regards the finished drink. "My car is just there." He points at a red Alpha Spider, the hood down. Staffe contemplates having to wait in Ugiha for 2 hours for his connection. He watches as Gutierrez swigs his drink and walks jauntily to the Alpha. Staffe joins him, says, "So, you know Almagen?" "I got Primos in Messina. Up in the hills, one old goat gets a flea and they all scratch. Yes, I know Almagen all right." "Don't you have to follow up on your story?" "The commissario will call me when they get their man." "You're in his pocket." "I'm in no one's pocket, Gwilly." He gets in, revs the car and raises his voice. "A journalist works with what he's got. If they change the music, you dance a different dance." The engine noise subsides, and the sound of "This Is the One" rushes forth. "I love the Stone Roses. Such a shame their spirit was slain by a million paper cuts. The damned Lord! Now, will you please get in?" Staffe climbs in and reaches for his seatbelt. But Raoul taps him on the arm, says, "No seatbelts, not in my car. They're killers. A man needs to be able to get out of a tight situation." They roar off, and by the time they're driving down Calle Real towards the port and passing Casa Joaquin, Raoul is joining in with "I Am the Resurrection." Manolo sits on the steps outside Bar Fuente, drinking gin and Fanta Orange. He's due to go up the mountain for another stint with his flock. The goats spend their summers high in the Sierra, it being too hot in the village. Manolo works to a rota of 2 weeks up the mountain and 1 week back in the village. His father, Rubio, used to spend the whole summer up the mountain with the goats, until one year he didn't come down. They say his brain fried. Now he lives with the nuns and the mad in Granada. When villagers talk of Rubio, they lower their voices. Raoul parks the Alpha in the shade of plane trees in the Placeta and slaps Manolo on the shoulder as he goes into the bar, calling him a goat fucker. Manolo looks into his cubata, sheepish. Staffe thinks that perhaps Manolo doesn't care for such fancy dans. Staffe orders mint tea, and Gutierrez calls him a ladyboy. Frog calls across to Gutierrez, "You are the ladyboy, you old dandy." Gutierrez squints and says, "Frog? Is that you? Frog?" Frog laughs, like a frog, comes across to Raoul, hitting him on the arm with a rolled copy of La Lente and muttering indecipherable dialect. He says to Staffe, "Just another dead foreigner, is that all they can come up with?" He throws down the paper and calls out, "That's his story." He grabs Raoul by the ear. "What have we done to deserve a bastard journalist amongst us? Aren't there enough lies in this village?" Raoul says, "I have no pen." He pulls out his pockets and says, "See, I'm not armed. You're safe."
"It doesn't matter. The shepherd can't read anyway."
"He talks, goat," says Frog. Everybody laughs, and Manolo looks ashamed, says, "I'm going up the mountain where there's beasts I can trust."
"He loves his beasts," scoffs Frog.
"There's nothing wrong with a goat," says Raoul.
"If your wife is out of action, well, that's no problem for him."
Raoul orders up a round in the twirl of a finger. "The goats, they're in my blood, too. My grandfather was the shepherd in Messina. I'd go up the mountain with him in summer." Manolo grabs his hand, says, "They are ladies' hands."
"Lady boys," says Frog. "You should have taken the flock."
"And go mad," says Raoul, looking at Manolo. He realizes he said the wrong thing. "I am sorry." "None of you has seen a day's work," says Manolo. "Doing the devil's work is all you can do, writing his lies for him." Gutierrez takes out his wallet, slams it on the bar, shouts, "How much have you got? I'll prove it. I know more about goats than you ever will. It's in my blood, I tell you."
"Prove it then," says Frog. "Go up the mountain with him."
Staffe says, "I'm going home. I need to sleep." He puts the €20 down, and Manolo picks it up, stuffs it down the neck of Staffe's shirt. As he leaves, Manolo follows him, and in the privacy of the square he whispers, "Tell me, Gwilly, when you went to the plastic, what exactly did you see?" "I told you. He was in a hell of a state." "Is there something you're not telling me?" Manolo clicks his fingers, and Suki runs to him, jumping, and Manolo scoops her up in one giant hand. He stands tall, his shoulders square for once, and he blocks the sun from Staffe, who can't see his friend's face properly, being in the shade. In a deeper, stronger voice, Manolo says, "You should tell me, you know. There is nothing to fear from me." Staffe says, "I told you what I know. Ask your friend Raoul what went on. He knows more than he writes, wouldn't you say?" Staffe drifts off with the window open, and in the fringe of his sleep he dreams the dry rattle of Manolo's moto is driving into his bedroom. He jolts from sleep and walks unsteadily to his balcony, sees Manolo's Bultaco Sherpa, a classic competition trail bike, but now clearly straining at every joint of its vintage red frame as it plies along the narrow road towards the cemetery. Behind, Raoul follows in the Alpha, with Suki in the front seat, jumping up and down. Yusuf removes the cardamom pod from the flame and places it on the large stone with the rest of the pods. He takes the smaller stone, rubs it on the larger, the roasted pods between. He makes slow circles, as he does 4 times each day between prayers. The aroma overcomes everything else. It transports him to Moulay Idris, to his family. He has no letterbox, and they have no telephone. He scrapes the cardamom essence from the stones with the blade of his knife, places it in the small pot of warm milk, adds honey, and takes a mouthful which ought to scorch him but doesn't. He tips back his head and gargles. His throat makes a noise. The words in his mind bubble, float to air with hundreds of bursting pods of sound. He was turned away from work this morning. Even though he got there at 6:30, the sun still beneath the serrated horizon of the Cabo de Gata. The lorry was already loaded up. The foreman watched Yusuf walk all the way down from the carretera, called him a lazy son of a whore, told him he shouldn't sleep so much. Sleep has always come too easily for Yusuf. He turns from the world readily. But for 3 days now he has struggled to find dreams. In his corrugated house, 3 metres by 3 metres, he lies out flat and straight on a bed of reeds, distilling the sound of the sea's surf. The water washes over the beach. The water was lifted high by a hand. Another hand had taken the man's broken head, tugged it viciously by the hair. Yusuf knew he should have turned his back. Crouching, peering beneath the plastic of the greenhouse, he watched in spite of himself. The buried man was up to his neck in the earth, and even though he couldn't resist, they tied a strap to his head, tethering it to a stake so his mouth faced the sky. Then they shoved the bottle into his mouth and emptied it into him, refilling the bottle from the drum of nitrophos. They carried on filling him up with more water, even though the man seemed quite motionless. If they poured so much water like that, would it be like being trapped inside the sea? And then they stopped. Perhaps it was he who disturbed them, stopped them finishing whatever it was they had started. But it was a day and a half before the police came in all their numbers, their wiry commissario in tow. And a day later he saw that Guiri. He made a recreation for him and thinks now that he was a fool for that. In the end, all he did was make his recreation with a hole in the earth, and an open fist, and a bottle of water. He knows how to find the stranger. His sad friend in the grey van who bought seeds told him, and Yusuf knows Al-Machen is 2 days' hard walk. He hears the gypsies talk of how lush it is up there, because of how the Moors taught the Spanish to make orchards from dust. The gypsies would walk from Adra to Al-Machen and steal tomatoes and beans, beg for eggs. If they went near the goats, they would be shot. When he was home in Moulay, he would look at the map, seeing El Andalus stashed like treasure at the bottom of Spain. He believed everything he heard in Moulay about the wealth that was here, about it being a promised land once theirs. It had been good to believe. His mind tumbles, free, and he sleeps.
End of Disc 1. Disc 2.
Chapter 6. Like a London bus, says Marie. Her hair is tied up in a scarf and she's wearing blue workman's overalls. Don't see you for a week and then... Very funny, says Staffe. You look like one of those women from the town hall sweeping the square. What is it with that? Why can't the men lift a finger in this bloody village? Where's Harry? Playing with Ruben down at his house. He has a friend? Of course he has a friend. He's got too many friends. Some days he's not home until after supper. Staffe doesn't know what to say. Surely, at his age, Harry shouldn't be left to such devices, practically feral down in the village, whilst Marie and Paolo lounge around up here on the mountain. Where's Paolo? Marie nods up the Sierra. High above them, Mulhacen's snowy peak juts up, like a smear of toothpaste against the azure and cloudless sky. He puts some Thai basil down. Reckons the sun won't be too strong by the time they come through. The restaurants in Orchiva have said they'll take it. Staffe looks through the telescope that Marie keeps on the veranda. It had been their father's. He watches Paolo toiling away with a roll-up in his mouth. He works with a hand tool in his right hand and a bucket of goat shit in his left. When he's done a row, he goes back and substitutes the bucket of shit for a bucket of water. He scoops the water with a cupped hand, his back bent double. His smile is unerring. You thought he'd fuck up, says Marie, didn't you? Well, I had my suspicions too, if I'm honest. All we have to worry about is the water. Well, there's plenty of water. You should get 6 hours every 8 days, according to your deeds. There's something wrong. The pulse's low.
Well, do you want me to look at it?
Paolo says he'll sort it out. Don't tread on his toes. Staffe turns away from the telescope, reaches out for his sister and pulls her close.
I'm pleased for you, I really am. Believe me, there's nothing would make me happier than to be wrong.
About Paolo?
Staffe nods, but he's thinking also about Harry.
Oh, Will. She holds him close. You're going to stay, aren't you?
She squeezes him extra tight. What's wrong?
Nothing's wrong.
I know you, Marie, and something's wrong. He holds her by the arms, leans away and weighs her up, deep in the eyes. She shrugs.
It's nothing. Just when you were poorly a few weeks ago, I thought someone was nosing around up here. That's all. Just me being stupid.
I can't stick around doing nothing forever.
Someone tried to kill you, for God's sake. You got all that rent from your properties. You don't need to go back to London and the damned force. She stands back from him, holding his hands, and looks him up and down. I have a friend. You should meet her.
Marie. He lets go of her hands. I'll find my own woman, all in good time.
You already have, but you let her slip. You're hopeless. He goes back to the telescope and scans the mountainside, tracking the edge of the high pine forest down to the Rio Messina's gorge, and he follows it to Manolo's stone-built cortijo. Out front, beneath his iron spit, he's built a fire but not set it. Hanging in the doorway of the cortijo is a goat, gutted, about to become choto. There's no sign of Manolo or Raoul, so he scans the mountain again, looking for Manolo's flock. Have you seen Manolo? He passed by with some borracho.
A smartish kind of fellow, slicked hair and an expensive shirt.
In a girl's car. Stank of cologne.
Well, that's Raoul. He's a reporter.
Oh, shit.
What's wrong?
Nothing. Just, he seemed familiar.
Spanish men of a certain age all look the same, don't you think? Says Staffe, laughing. The waning libido, a last lunge in their loins.
You're right.
Where did they go?
Up towards Jackson's place.
Manolo must have gone up there. There's nothing else between Jackson's and the other side of the pass. But it's a good 2 hours' walk from here. You'd best set off now, while it's still light, if that's what you want. I came to see you, though. She goes up to her brother, hugs him and says, I know you will. You're up to something, but don't forget you're supposed to be taking it easy.
He knows about Mum and Dad,
whispers Staffe into Marie's hair.
He whispers it softly, half hoping she won't hear. She tenses up but says nothing, squeezes him a little tighter, and he says, And you're worried about someone sniffing around. What's going on, Marie? Her arms and shoulders are rigid like mortise and tenon. She says, I've seen him before. I'm sure I have. It is dusk, and he finishes the last of his water. At this altitude, it's already cold, and only the peaks are getting the sun. He has no sweater and nothing to eat. His wounds are sore, and he has left his medicine in the village, way down below in a crease of the mountains. The med is a thin ribbon of blue between the wide spread of plastic farming and the reddening sky. In this light, the plastic looks like salt flats, all the way from Adra to Almeria. You can see Africa on a good day. Today is a good day, and the clouds are low over the Rif. The goat track takes him into a dark copse of chestnut trees. He can hear water,
Thinks he can also hear the scurry of animals. The locals tell terrible tales of the scorpions up here in the Sierra, and in the cool he suspects his fever might be coming back. He shouldn't have drunk so much with Raoul yesterday. Was it only yesterday? The track swirls back on itself, and he hears howling. This high, any dogs would be wild. And then the track ends. He stands on a promontory, overlooking a waterfall. The thin river trickles 20 metres or so down into a pool. He squints, discerns, on the banks of the pool, perching on boulders, Raoul and Manolo with a man he's never seen before. It must be Jackson Roberts, the American. A wild old war vet, so they say. Staffe breathes deep, fills his chest with air and opens his mouth. His body wants to call out, but he thinks twice. Raoul dangles his legs above the pool of wild water, and Manolo is messing with his dog, Suki. The third man, fussing with a fire, calls out in an American accent, "You should have brought your fucking goat, man." Staffe climbs down towards the pool, holding onto the trunks of small, clinging trees, obscured from the men below, but still able to hear them. Manolo says, "You are the host. It is your party." The American drawls, "We can eat dog. We did in Vietnam." "Korea's where they eat dog," says Raoul, who turns to Manolo. "How can we trust anything this shit tells us?" "You're drunk," says the American, who has a thick wad of hair, light brown but with streaks of gold. The jaw is strong. His bare-chested torso is lean. The pecs and abdomen well defined. All that gives away a life of decadence are his rosy, bloodshot eyes, the deep, treacly voice, and the scrawn of his neck. Jackson stands over Raoul, rests a foot on the journalist's shoulder, who grips the edge of the rock. "Why would I lie? You're the journalist." "That article is shit, that's for sure," says Manolo. He sounds morose and lies back, pulling Suki towards him, resting the animal on his chest. "I am hungry." "You should have brought that goat," says Jackson. "Why would I feed you after all you have done?" "I have chorizo," says Roberts. "And the beans are in. I'll make a fabada." "And I'll tend the bar," says Raoul. "I'm going home," says Manolo. "No," says Raoul. "It's dark. We're stuck for the night." They trundle off, muttering, and every now and again Raoul laughs. Roberts drawls into the night, but all the way there's not a peep out of Manolo as they make their way to Jackson Roberts' cortijo, set low in a sheltered dell beneath a ridge, which the locals call Silla Montar, the saddle. Staffe follows, and sits above the cortijo until he can smell burning thyme. Plumes of smoke rise from the chimney. The sounds from inside are muffled, and he looks down the mountain to the twinkling lights of Almagen and Messina, like scattered stars. His wounds pinch, and he muses upon what secrets an all-seeing eye might witness from somewhere like here. It is completely dark now and getting cold. Time to brace himself and go in. Chapter 7. Jackson Roberts nestles up to the fireplace on a low, wicker-seated rocking chair. Every now and again he leans right forward and stirs the pot on the fire. The rest of the time he rolls and smokes cigarettes, every other one a modest spliff. Manolo is in the corner, his vast frame hunched in a dining chair, and quiet now that he has finished berating Staffe for coming here, risking his health by walking all this way in his condition. Tonight, in Manolo's brooding silence, Staffe senses deep disquiet. Raoul cannot keep still. He tops up everyone's drinks and mooches out onto the terrace and back again, waxing lyrical about how good the country life is. How this reminds him of when his father and uncles taught him to play cards and drink whiskey in their cortijos. Raoul catches Staffe's eye as he goes back out onto the terrace. "You'll never see a night sky like the ones up here. Come." Staffe follows Raoul outside, and together they look up into the dark, star-speckled sky. Gradually, new stars begin to appear as their eyes adjust. The journalist says, lowering his voice, "There's something I think you should know." The door opens, and light spills onto the terrace from inside the cortijo, dimming their view of the universe. Jackson appears, lighting out a spliff. "Where's your family cortijo, then, Raoul?" "The other side of the Rio Messina." Jackson offers the spliff around, and Staffe declines, but Raoul tokes heartily, and often, giving Staffe a resigned look, as if to say his disclosure can wait a while. They finish the spliff, and they all go back inside. Staffe saying to Jackson, "It's good of you to put me up for the night." "You're Marie's brother, right? How could I not?" says Jackson. "I hadn't guessed it would be so desolate up here. They could declare war out there, and you'd never know." "Well, not tonight," says Jackson, laughing quietly to himself. "This place could tell some stories, I bet." Staffe looks at an oil canvas hung on the undressed stone wall that leads into one of the bedrooms. It's a landscape, hued of red and yellow, and in the middle distance 2 hunters walk away. A woman and another man remain behind. "You sell them?" "Never." Jackson's sculpted features warp in the fireglow flicker. The only other light is from a church candle on the bleached wooden table made from planks of chestnut wood, and a paraffin light hanging in the doorway to the terrace. "It's for private consumption." "Tell him who the woman is," says Raoul. Staffe sees Manolo shoot Jackson a hateful look. "It's from a long time ago," says Jackson. "When there were 2 artists in the village," says Raoul. "I'm no artist," says Jackson. Manolo says, "He was never one of us." Staffe catches up with what they're talking about. "Barrington," he says. "They fucked our women and told the world lies. They don't know one thing about us." Manolo finishes his glass of whiskey, turns on Jackson. "You paint like him. Why so much red? Are you a commie?" Raoul says, "I don't care what you say, but Barrington could paint. He turned out some shit, but his best stuff. That's how history will judge him." Staffe returns to the painting, looks at it hard. "That's private," says Roberts, leaving his fire and offering round a plate of empanadas. "It has humanity," says Staffe. The painting appears to be a landscape, but almost lost in the folds of thick oil, the woman is clearly forlorn. Larger, in the foreground, a man carves a piece of wood in the shade of pines. Staffe pops an empanada in his mouth. "Come and sit down." Jackson looks back, long and hard at Manolo, his smile gone. "This is amazing," says Staffe, savouring the empanada. "Made 'em myself." "Who is the man carving?" says Staffe, running his tongue along his teeth, putting his finger on the taste, star anise, amongst the filling inside the flaky pastry. "My father," murmurs Manolo. "It could be anyone," says Jackson. "What about your mother, Manolo? Still gone?" says Raoul. "That was a fatal unsuitability." "You don't know how much he loved her. He couldn't be without her," says Manolo. "Fatal?" says Staffe. "A figure of speech," says Raoul. "You never met Barrington." I know he did his bit in the war, says Staffe. Joined the International Brigade when he was 17. That says something about the man. It was a war and he was drawn to it, says Manolo. It wasn't his war, though. And yes, he looks daggers at Jackson Roberts, Mother is still gone. Staffe wants to ask if that was why Rubio went mad. Instead, he says, fearing for his friend's state of mind, people don't talk about the war. I thought it was taboo. We buried it deep, says Raoul. I can tell you plenty, says Manolo. Not tonight, says Raoul, replenishing Manolo's glass and whispering to Staffe, we have to talk later. It's worse than I thought. Worse? Jackson interrupts. Stirring the pot, he says, fuck the stuff of life and the stuff of art. He stands up. Now let's stuff our faces. He lifts the lid from the earthenware pot with his bare hands, and a cloud of steam bellows from the hearth. Bring your bowls. The fabada is thick and unctuous and pitted with chunks of chorizo the size of your thumb. The burnt spice of paprika oozes, and the stew is blazing hot all the way from the mouth to the belly. Each of his guests blows out with puffed cheeks, and Jackson brings out a quart jug of the local wine, cloudy amber. I put a few chilies in, and the wine flows. I heard they had a way of killing in the war, says Staffe. It's a vague memory from an article he read once about the war as they fought it up in the Basque country. They would bury a man in the earth up to his neck, and, as he talks, he remembers the African in the blue and yellow burnous, with no tongue to tell his tale. He closes his eyes, can see the African pouring the water into his open palm. Go on, says Raoul. They would fill him with water. I thought we weren't talking about the war, says Jackson. Manolo leans back from the table. He leans further and further back, grips the table as if to prevent himself from falling. It was the fucking communists who did that. The good guys did that. Ha! Your father would be too young to have fought in the war, says Staffe, to Manolo, like mine. They're a lost generation, the men who never got to become heroes. His war was with poverty. He went to Germany. That's where he found my mother. He fought for her. Manolo drinks his wine down in one, and it goes to his eyes. Raoul says, I heard your brother is back. Does he see your mother? Manolo looks at Raoul quizzically, as if struggling to choose which reply to administer, but it seems that drink might have defeated him. Jackson says, let's get you to bed. He comes across, puts an arm around Manolo and helps him to his feet. Raoul nods to Staffe, indicating that they should go outside, and they leave Jackson and Manolo to it, both looking to the stars as they stand on the terrace. Up here, cloudless and with no light for miles and miles, the universe seems bigger. Staffe says, you said it was worse than you thought. I don't know how much to tell you. Raoul plants a heavy hand on Staffe's shoulder. Tell me everything. Once you've been told, that's it. There's no going back. Was it a war killing? Raoul shakes his head. He was... Inside the cortijo, something breaks. A plate or a bottle. And Manolo shouts out that Jackson is a cunt and that he's going to kill him. He was what? Says Staffe. Tell me who was killed down there. No! Comes the cry from inside the cortijo. It's Jackson. Raoul says, I was going to say he was already dead. They didn't drown him. "No, don't!" shouts Jackson. "We should go in," says Raoul. "Manolo has a dreadful temper." "Tell me what happened down there in the greenhouse. Who was killed?" "Later," says Raoul, rushing back into the cortijo, calling, "Manolo! Stop!" "Already dead," says Staffe, following Raoul, seeing that Manolo has Jackson Roberts pushed up against the fireplace. The flames from the fire are catching his trousers, and his eyes bulge. "Let go of him!" shouts Raoul, grabbing Manolo, but he makes no impression. Manolo's shoulders aren't hunched. They are broad like before, and he has both of his thick-fingered hands around Jackson's throat. Staffe tries to help Raoul pull Manolo off, but there's no chance. Jackson looks at him pleadingly. Another 20 seconds, and he will be dead for sure. Staffe looks around the room, smelling the burning cloth of Jackson's trousers. Picking up the pot, he empties the remains of the fabada onto the floor and holds the pot high, advancing quickly and bringing it down as viciously as he dares onto his friend's head. The sound of the pan on skull is hollow, and it rings out through the commotion. Manolo turns to look at Staffe. His hand still on Jackson's throat, and Staffe thinks if he hits him again any harder, he might crack Manolo's skull. "It's all right," said Manolo. "I don't want him dead." He relaxes his grip, and Jackson gulps for air. Manolo's eyes hood down, and he wavers, unsteady on his feet. "Really, I don't want him dead. Far from it." Jackson bends double, coughing and cursing as Staffe and Raoul lead Manolo back to his chair, ease him down before his legs give way. "Are you all right?" says Staffe. Jackson nods, quite vociferously. "It was nothing. Let's forget it. Come on. Let's have a drink and then get to bed." Staffe clears the table and sweeps up the spilled fabada. By the time he is done, Manolo is asleep in his chair with a sad look on his downturned face, his arms hugging his big torso and Suki burrowed into the crook of his neck. As he puts a blanket over his friend, Staffe catches Jackson taking down the landscape painting, placing it against the wall in the other room. "I never liked the fucking thing," he says. Staffe notices Manolo's knife on the floor by the fireplace. He picks it up and runs his fingers all around the intricate carvings of the goat's head and horns. You'd think he would have had enough of goats. The three of them sit up, drinking and talking about Barrington, and all the while Staffe waits for Jackson to leave, but instead he bunks down on the sofa. "You take the bed in the other room." "No, it's your bed. I came uninvited." "I insist. As a guest, the least you can do is accept my hospitality. I won't take no for an answer." "Go on," says Raoul, on the verge of sleep in his chair. "We'll talk tomorrow. You can buy me lunch in Fuente." And with that, Staffe retires. He sleeps deep, so deep that not even Raoul's snoring wakes him. Chapter 8. Staffe sits on the slate rim of the stone trough outside Jackson's cortijo. He dips his feet into the icy water, and the shorn edge of the slate cuts into the backs of his thighs. The sun is just up, and, 5,000 feet high, a chill from the night still clings. He thinks about last night, and what Raoul had said to him about things being worse than he thought. He cups his balls with one hand, edges himself off the slate with the other, sliding into the trough, and it catches all his breath. He gasps, can't help but whoop at the cold. Lying in the trough, he soon becomes numb, and for the first time in months he cannot feel his wounds. He runs a thumb over his scar tissue and presses. Can feel it a little. And he realizes he has left his medication down at his house. Woozy, and almost in a trance, he sees the events of the past 2 days quite clearly. But he doesn't believe it, not as presented to him. His fingers and toes are all gone to prune by the time he gets out. Staffe had hoped Raoul would rise early and join him outside, tell him what happened down in the greenhouse, which for some reason he is intent on keeping secret from Jackson, and maybe Manolo too. But as he gathers his clothes, a chorus of deep snoring comes from the comatose cortijo, where Jackson sleeps alongside Raoul. Every now and then, Raoul snorts like a pig, just like he did the other night at his place in Almeria. Staffe smiles to himself and makes his way down the mountain, wondering what more Raoul will have to say to him today when they meet for lunch in Bar Fuente. By the time he crosses the lateral track that runs to Messina, he can see the old boys coming up the mountain to tend their water. The campo is pitted with cortijos, like single bricks of Lego, and if you listen closely, even though they're still half a mile away, you can hear the old boys talking to each other hundreds of yards apart. In his first weeks in Almagen, before the wounds reopened and became infected, Staffe would come up here to spend a day with Edu. Edu runs the tiny Museo de Almagen, which is 3 small rooms above the Ayuntamiento near Harry's school. It opens Tuesday afternoons, Saints' Day mornings for an hour after the Missa, and by appointment. When he's not overrun with museum duties, proud Edu tries to stay off the local alcofilth by busying himself at his cortijo just above the village. He lives alone and always has, they say, but Staffe can't quite work him out. He is from good stock, but is a loafer with a penchant for the Russian girls down on the coast. Above all, Edu is bitter. "You should choose your company more wisely," says Edu, as Staffe approaches. His skin is tight and his eyes are bright. His nostrils are flared, and his face has something of the baby about him, even though he must be into his 60s. Life seems to have taken it easier on Edu than on most of the locals. He once confided to Staffe that his father did rather well under Franco. Rumours have it that his sister once had a thing for Barrington. On the terrace, Edu pours coffee into shot glasses on an upturned plastic beer crate. "I saw you coming down the mountain. There's only one person up that way." "I was with Gutierrez. Do you know him?" "I know plenty Gutierrez." "Raoul. He's a journalist." "Ah." Edu drinks his coffee down in one and turns away, fussing with his vine. It is trained over an iron frame to give shelter. "I don't know what's wrong with these leaves. I need them bigger." "He's from Messina, this Gutierrez." "And fancies himself as a little emperor. But you don't get to be a little emperor without first being a big prick." "That's Edu's law," laughs Staffe. "Edu's law. I like that." "Well, you must remember him when he lived up here." "His mother was left stranded when her husband went to Germany. He went for work and money and got so much he never came back. Raoul was left with all the mouths to feed, and he took them all down to Almeria. This place was always too small for him, if you ask me." Edu goes back to his vine and curses. "You know it doesn't do to mix. People here should stay here. I'm sorry, Guili, but these shoots aren't good enough. The shade is ruined to hell." How would Gutierrez know the American? "Tell me about your wounds. Are you recovered?" "And how would the American know Barrington?" "Anybody would think you are the Guardia," laughs Edu. "All your questions." "He's a good host." I have known him 30 years, and not so much as a glass of Tirano from the cocksucker.
30 years?
What's that? Edu raises his eyebrows, purses his lips.
Jackson Roberts has been here 30 years.
Maybe more, since Vietnam. But quiet, please. I can hear something. An engine is roaring, but Staffe can't see where. Edu clambers up the small bancale to the bean field, which stretches away up to the Messina track. "Son of a whore!" shouts Edu. Beyond the beans, a cloud of dust plumes up, curving away to the left, but the sound seems to be coming straight at the house. The engine roar gets louder and louder, and the partridges, caged at the back of the cortijo, start flapping and squawking. Then a blur of red whooshes through the sound of the engine and is gone, leaving an imprint of the sound of She Bangs the Drums. "Stone roses," said Staffe. "What?" The dust comes across onto the terrace, and the engine noise fades. But when it is gone, the sound of music remains like a tattoo. "Gutierrez," says Staffe. "What?" "That was his music. His car. But where does that track lead?" "He'll have to go down to the bridge. There's only one road across the Rio Messina, but he knows that. He'll be going to his family's cortijo. They were shepherds. It's in the blood, you know, up and down the mountain like cock-sucking goats." "Like Manolo?" "That family." "You don't like Manolo?" Staffe looks away from the diminishing cloud of dust, the engine roar now distant in the folds of the Sierra. "Why is that, Edu?" "People should know their station."
"They say his father went crazy up in the mountains, living with goats and his brain frying in the sun."
"Rubio? He went away and he came back with that woman. That's what sent him mad." "A fatal unsuitability," says Staffe.
"Fatal?"
"A figure of speech."
Staffe drinks his coffee, and the two of them look across the Sierra to the clouds thrown up by the car.
"You didn't get on with Rubio either." "A man should be able to control his heart."
Edu looks up at the sun and dabs his forehead with a handkerchief.
"This summer never ends. We need rain for the land. Look at my balsa."
He points towards the circular concrete water reserve, which is 3/4 empty.
"I have to tend to my beans."
"Rubio couldn't control his heart. What about his wife?" Edu looks at Staffe the way a kind-hearted man with empty pockets will regard a beggar.
"You worry me with all the questions. People here, they're not going to like it. Here, the past stays where it is."
Staffe wonders if he should ask Edu about Marie's water, but he decides against it. Instead he says, "It looks as if you'll be getting your academy."
"No academy of mine. They're all cunts. After money, and not minding if they have to hoard their history to someone else's culture."
"But the academy will honour the village's traditions. It would help secure its future. Tourists will come."
"It'll be all about that bastard Barrington, and nothing about our way of life."
"But it's going to happen, isn't it?"
"Not if we can help it. We are all right the way we are. Hey, if you want some real Spanish culture, you should come to my matanza. Fuck the foreign painters. Wednesday, at 9 sharp, and bring some of your fancy whiskey."
Manolo puts his finger into her ear, and Suki moans. She moves her head in a small figure of 8 to get his finger just where she wants it, and she gives off a long sigh of satisfaction. Then she licks Manolo
and unplugs herself from him, jumps off the seat of his Boltaco and gambols up the hillside. But she soon runs out of steam. She's getting on now, and he remembers how he and his father came by her. She filled the gap left by Astrid. The gap Astrid left had grown with time. She'd disappeared before, and to begin with, this time seemed no different. It was autumn, the time she liked to go to Morocco. If she wanted winter, she'd never have left Germany, she said. So, Octobers were for Tangier and Chefchaouen. But this time, she didn't take Barrington because he was dying, and Jackson remained, and her son. His brother, Agustin, was already in Germany, reclaimed, it seems, by his and Manolo's grandparents. Manolo never went, nor Rubio. They had the goats. He can see Africa now, like a strip of lean in the fat of the tocino ham. He should have insisted on going with his mother. Things might have been different. Astrid might be here now, and his father not with the nuns in the madhouse. At the very least, he might understand more why she abandoned them. He thinks, how strange that Agustin should have come back. But then, not strange at all. He had to come back sometime. But all he could talk about was Astrid and where she might be. Indeed, he seemed preoccupied with the notion that their mother was dead, which meant that Manolo couldn't take him to see Rubio, because of all the things in his small world that Rubio can't bear. It's talk of Astrid. Manolo knows that you can love someone too much. He knows that it is better to not be with someone than to love them too much, to make it impossible for them to live alongside you. He looks across to his goats and knows they will be just fine. The winter was wet and there's plenty to go at, still on the mountain. It's Suki he worries about. And himself. He fears it in his blood. He thinks of Astrid, who fawned on him and Agustin, telling them constantly that she loved them, but who would leave at the drop of a beret. Agustin disappeared too, until he came back, brought running by death. Their maternal grandfather was dying in a foreign land, and his brother had come running, looking for Mummy. That's not how it should be. Manolo looks up at his herd. Suki wants to be off, to tend them, but he doesn't want her up the mountain alone, not with the wild dogs. So he picks her up and holds her tight. In the distance, he thinks he can hear music, or a siren. Perhaps he's going mad. Harry follows Ruben and the other boys down into the lower barrio. During his special Spanish lessons, when the nun leant over him, supervising the changing of a word and smelling of ham fat, he saw his Uncle Will walk past the school and through the Plaza de Iglesia. Now, free, he is intent upon demonstrating to his uncle that he is getting on just fine with the village boys. However, Gracia is standing by the alleyway that leads to his uncle's house. Ruben shouts, "Harry, are you going to play dolls with your girlfriend?" Harry's Spanish is good enough to get the gist, not quite good enough to make a riposte. Gracia looks at him with her big, surprised eyes. She's got her hair down, and it is sun-kissed by the long summer. Harry feels funny in his stomach when he sees Gracia, especially when she's changed out of her school uniform, wearing her floaty primrose dress that her mother fashioned from offcuts. The other children poke fun at her for having homemade clothes. This dress comes to her knees and has thin straps that show her shoulders, brown as almond shells. "Don't listen to them, Harry," she calls. "I was going for a walk along the route to Barrington." "A walk! Maybe today he will kiss her," calls Ruben, and the boys run down the hill to the water troughs, laughing. Beyond the sound of the boys running away, Harry hears a siren from the top of the village. The Guardia, or a fire engine, perhaps. There have been fires up in the Sierra this summer, and he knows from his teachers not to leave bottles when they go into the campo.
They magnify the sun and tinder the scorched grass. He follows the boys down to the troughs, but Gracia runs up to him and tugs at the hem of his shirt. "Show me your treasures, Harry." "I showed them last week." She giggles, says, "I love the way you talk. Say it in English." He sits under the walnut tree. If he were to climb it, and were he light enough not to break its bough, he could make his way onto the balcony of his uncle's bedroom. He says in English, "Let's go along the ruta." Gracia smiles and sits next to him, puts her hand into his pocket and pulls out his leather pouch. It used to be a pencil case, but now it is a museum of the life he left behind. She unzips the pouch and places it in the primrose canopy of her lap. One by one she removes a 50-pence piece, a picture of Harry and his best friend Connor, taken as they plunged into the water on the log flume at Thorpe Park, the ticket from when his uncle took him to see Orient play Arsenal in the FA Cup, his Disneyland pass with his image of Mickey in front of the enchanted castle. That was the treat when his mum and Paolo told him he was going to have a sister. And finally, the item that Gracia likes best, and which makes her big eyes go bigger still and her cherub mouth hang open in awe. The folded Polaroid image of his baby sister in shades of black and white within his mother's belly. Gracia whispers, "Miracle." Harry is troubled because he doesn't like the picture. He knows for sure that he should. The boys shout up to Harry, but he can't understand what they say. Gracia looks up at him and says they should go. She seems sad and holds his hand, tugs him to come the opposite way to the boys, and says, "When your sister comes, I will call her my prima. I'll take her for walks, and when she is old enough, I will teach her Spanish and how to make papas a la pobre." "Well, we won't be here that long," says Harry. Certain he can't stand to be in Spain for much longer. But it would break his heart to not see Gracia ever again. He squeezes her hand. "I love you, Harry. Oh, don't be stupid." Staffe watches Harry walk off down the Ruta Barrington. The route descends into the valley bottom, passing through almonds and olives, down to where the oranges are happy to thrive. It was here long before Barrington. He's on his roof, sitting on the very edge in an old deck chair, reading Monsignor Quixote with a stick of chorizo and a stump of the dry village bread. He washes it down with a swig of sin-alcohol beer and looks across the rooftops to where Gracia's mother, Consuela, is laying out peppers on wire racks to dry in the sun. She had been watching the two children too, and she catches Staffe's eye. Staffe waves, smiles, and calls, "Hola!" She raises a hand, but is tight-lipped. Consuela brings up Gracia alone. Nobody talks about where Gracia came from or where the father went, but the other women of the village pay her only the most cursory pleasantries. When the fishman comes up in his van from Motril, she stands alone at the back until the queue is gone, and buys €1's worth of boccherones. He puts in a couple of sardines gratis, and she accepts them, ashamed at the charity. It doesn't help that she works for Salva in Bar Fuente. That's a man's world, and Consuela has fine features and a flat stomach. They say Salva is so supremely endowed that his wife could take no more. It is why she disappeared in the night, and he is alone and has to take on Consuela for his kitchen. None of which aids Consuela's cause. Some say she is the one who should disappear. Consuela turns away, towards a row of cars. Staffe registers the noise too, and looks towards the cemetery, where he sees flashing blue lights, 1, 2, and a third. Then a fourth. The Guardia 4x4s race up the track. There can't be more than 4 police Land Rovers in the whole valley, and they're all whooshing up towards the lower barrio. All across the rooftops, people hang off their balconies beholding the commotion. Consuela has a hand to her mouth, leaning right off her roof as Harry and Gracia come running up the track after the police cars. The villagers pack along one side of the bridge, a rickety affair made from blue metal railings sunk into concrete ballasts. The lights from the Guardia 4x4s are still flashing, and there's also a squad car from the Cuerpo. On the other side of the barranco, which the bridge spans, Manolo sits on his haunches, looking sad beside his red bultaco. Staffe clambers up the hillside and edges towards the ravine, looking down into the barranco. In the bottom, its nose plunged headfirst, and its stylish rear end facing the sky, is a red alpha spider. Staffe catches his breath, murmurs, "Raoul." He feels weak in the knees, sick in the pit of his stomach. Round and round, stuck in a groove, the sound of "I am the resurrection" wheels away in the mountain air. But the Cuerpo officer reaches into the car and cuts the music dead. Then he cuts Raoul's seatbelt webbing, begins to pull him free. On the Messina side of the bridge, an ambulance parks up. Its back doors swing open. On the bridge, the fire brigade have set up a winch, and they are lowering a metal-framed canvas stretcher into the dry river bed. Staffe watches their every move as they lift out Raoul, the tattered lemon shreds of his shirt drenched with blood all down his back. He knows that if he hadn't visited the murder scene in Almeria, Raoul wouldn't be in the bottom of this barranco, being manhandled by two Guardia. The Guardia heave him onto the stretcher and attach the hook of the hoist to the cradle. The firemen on the bridge wind the winch, and Gutierrez rises slowly. Higher and higher, he sways in the air, and the villagers gasp, mutter. As he reaches the bridge, an untarnished silence descends. There is no wind, no birdsong. The canvas stretcher is soaked in blood, and from its middle a drip of blood falls, and then another, like sap. A policeman in a blue suit, as opposed to the green of the Guardia Civil, who oversee the law in the countryside, points from the bridge to where Staffe is sitting, beckons him. As Staffe makes his way slowly down the hillside, he sees that the officer must be Cuerpo Nacional, unusual in these parts. The officer is short and wiry, with a long bandido moustache. "Joie de Guerre," says the Cuerpo officer. "I am English," says Staffe. "He was a friend of yours." "Not really." "I hear that you are police in England." "This is a holiday." "Not convalescence." The Cuerpo has a laurel insignia on his tunic, and Staffe thinks that might make him a commissario. His holster is impossibly shiny, and his moustache jet black, though the groomed slicks of hair beneath his peaked cap are grey. He smokes a Cohiba cigar with its familiar black and gold band. Its deep, sweet tar smells of success, hard won. He looks up at Staffe and over his shoulder as he says, "We know this man. He came up from Almeria and he was drunk. You were with him, and as a policeman you should do better." "Do better? This is not my fault." The officer lowers his voice. "He was drunk as a monkey, and they are telling me this was a stupid accident." The officer extends his hand to Staffe, shakes it with a limp action. "I am Sanchez. Come on, we shall get out of their way. Come on to the bridge with me." Staffe looks again at the insignia on Sanchez's uniform. "Commissario?" He follows Sanchez. "Some crazy circle of life up here in the mountains. I should know." "You're from up here." "You could say that. It seems the place never lets you go.
There's always some kind of mess needs clearing up. The officer smooths down his sleeves and nods to his driver, who starts the car. Together they look over the bridge. Way down below, Staffe sees a red rag. When he looks more closely, he sees it as a duster, patches of yellow making it look like the Spanish flag. A blood-soaked duster, he thinks. He looks away from the rag, but thinks the commissario may have seen him. Sanchez says, "Good luck with becoming an uncle. Up here in the Alpujarras is one big family, but you're best off out of it." "How do you know about me?" "We attend to strangers, Inspector Wagstaff. And take my advice." Sanchez looked down from the bridge, towards where the bloody rag flutters in a strawberry bush in the dry riverbed. "Forget what you think you might have seen. It's better that you leave." And Sanchez ushers Staffe away, watches him all the way up the road, back to the village. When Staffe gets to the last bend where the bridge is about to disappear from sight in the tight curves that must have done for Raoul, he sees a red motorbike weave up the hillside. He waves, thinking it is Manolo, but it isn't him. Manolo is above the bridge still with Suki. The other red motorbike belongs to Jackson Roberts, who rides it fast and sure, away from the ravine that took Raoul Gutierrez. For the first time in her life, Suki has a strap around her neck. Manolo ties it tight and puts a lead to it. He will make a gift of her to Gracia. That girl will surely know how to care properly. It's in her blood. He's on the high side of the ravine, and the rest of the village are all on the other side, with the police cars, ambulance, and the fire engine. They begin to disperse. Consuela looks up at him, and he thinks she smiles, but she looks quickly away, and he feels lost. He wants to touch her, and he's sure he never will. The sadness feels like a memory he won't ever be able to lose. When she is all the way gone from his sight, not looking back even once, Manolo follows. He ties Suki to the drainpipe that runs down from the roof he sometimes sees her on, hanging her washing, drying her peppers, looking across the valley towards the sea. Sometimes he hears her sing. It saddens him so, the beauty of everything she is. He walks quickly away, out of the village along the Acequia, and all the way across the Sierra to the Silla Montar. He's going over the top and down into Granada, into the past, to make things right before any more harm is visited upon him, the remnants of his family and the people he loves. Above Edu's cotijo, he pauses, watches Edu coming across the campo from the direction of Messina. In all the years he has patrolled these mountains, tending his father's flock, Manolo has never seen Edu on his land. Stretched out on his terrace, bottles littered at his feet, yes, but never striding his land the way he is now. He drinks water from his bota and waits for Edu to come close enough to speak, which she does. And Manolo turns his back, continues on his way. Once Edu stops calling him, Manolo's thoughts turn to his English friend, what he might be made of. Manolo can't help thinking he might come up short. Part 2. Chapter 9. D.S. Pulford isn't sure where he is. These last few months he's been doubling his shifts, official and not. He rubs his eyes, thinks for a moment he's upside down, but he's on the sofa. He's still wearing his clothes, and the sun is just up. It is 20 to 5. 2 nights running he hasn't made it to the bedroom. Sometimes he doesn't know if he's taking work home or the other way around. Immigrant labour gangs have reared up again in Hackney, and knife crime looks as if it will never go away. The other day they stabbed a 17-year-old temp on Fenchurch Street. It was her second day at work. He thinks he has a plan. Can persuade Brandon to give up the gun that Jadis Golding used on Staffe, and possibly, if a deal with the CPS can be achieved, obtain a statement. But he has to be careful. A decent defence lawyer could leave them hung to dry, and Jadis could walk for good. Brandon says he knows where the gun is. Says he was upstairs in Cuts when it happened. But he is still insisting that his warrant for the hit-and-run is withdrawn before he gives anything up. If Pulford was to bring him in now, that would be game over, because Belat's barrister says they have enough evidence that Pulford has breached procedure to ensure he never works again. So, last night, after he was done at Ledengate, and after he had been to see the poor temp down at City Morgue, Pulford went and stood in the lime kiln, looking up at Jasmine's flat. She screamed at him, and some neighbours had come out and told him he was a bastard and shouldn't he be out catching rapists. But he stood there for maybe half an hour, until he could be sure she had called Jadis. His phone is ringing, somewhere. That's what must have awakened him. Dawn is pale and he rubs his eyes, knows he won't get back to sleep, so he rifles the pockets of his jacket and pulls out his phone and answers. In all these months, it is the first time he has heard the voice. "Fucking back off," says Jadis. "Come out, like a man, and I won't need to keep an eye on your woman. I won't tell you again." "Is that a threat?" says Pulford. The lion is silent. It hisses, as if expressing what Jadis could say, that he has shot a copper before, and if he's in for a penny, he may as well go down for twopence. Jadis doesn't say anything. "I saw a man going in there, Jadis. I suppose she's got to find the rent, now you're not working." "I'll fucking—" "Yes?" The lion hisses again. "We should meet, Jadis." "Maybe we will, but you won't see me coming." And the lion is dead.
"How did you know, Raoul?" asks Pepper.
She's late 20s, but has a hoarse voice, drags on a cigarette between mouthfuls of coffee. Like many of the people at Raoul's funeral, she works for La Lente. "A chance encounter. He showed me Almeria, took me to a peña on the Avenida Loca." Staffe shades his eyes from the setting sun. "They are in El Marisco, barely half a mile from where they buried the victim in Raoul's last ever story."
"He liked his flamenco, that's for sure," says Pepper.
"And his stone roses."
"Ah, I got him into them, but he preferred drink and women. Did he show you those, too?"
Staffe cannot see her eyes behind the oversized Prada shades. He says, "I heard they didn't have a post-mortem." Pepper raises her glasses, gives Staffe a quizzical stare.
"The coroner's verdict was clear."
Staffe wonders what else Raoul was going to tell him about the killing amongst the plastic. He looks across at a defaced sign for Golfo Tropical, says, "It seems like some people aren't too keen on recreation around here."
"They're attached to their water. It's kind of important. They don't need it wasted on golf courses."
Pepper finishes her cacique rum.
"There are a couple of things of mine up at his place. I need to go."
"I can give you a hand," says Staffe. She lowers her sunglasses.
"I bet you could. But first, tell me what you want."
I don't. Then I will go alone. The maître d' hovers. Staffe thinks he knows him, or maybe vice versa. There was a murder Raoul was covering. Both Staffe and Pepper instinctively look towards the plastic, the sea beyond. He knew a friend of mine. Is that how you met Raoul? Not exactly. Do you believe in the small world? Staffe shakes his head. And what is worse, he knew a man I would like to see dead. Ah. In our worlds we have to be suspicious of such coincidences. Pepper takes off her glasses and lays them on the table. She says, Can you promise me, on whatever is holy in your life, that if there is a story in what you are snooping for, you come to me? I am not snooping. Promise. He nods. Watches Pepper pull a bunch of keys from her pocket. As she spins them on her finger, he thinks she's probably trouble. Nevertheless, he goes with her. Pepper lies on Raoul's bed, stares at his ceiling. I'd like a few minutes, she says. Staffe says, I'll check out the view. He climbs the steep stone steps onto the roof, and from the terrace he can just make out the canopy above the etched window of Casa Joaquin, where he and Raoul shared manzanilla and the red shrimp of Almeria just the other evening. He can see the port. The other way, across the rooftops, and beyond the cathedral, the Alcazar. After a while, Staffe thinks he can hear crying from below. But when Pepper eventually emerges onto the roof, she is dry-eyed and carrying a holdall emblazoned with Feria de Almeria 2011. I've got what I came for. They go down into the apartment, and Staffe notices a large carved door they haven't been through. He tries the handle, but it is locked. What's this? He says. He wasn't born here. It was a start from nothing. Did you know that? His father went to Germany. He loved it so much here. His bulls and his peñas. And he could sail. God, he could sail. But all that's ash now. Just ash. She reaches up to the lintel above the door and pulls down a key. You can't go in. The door is made from chestnut, intricately carved. It is heavier than any of the other doors, as if to an entire house. Staffe pushes it open and listens to it creak. There are large leaded windows on either side of the room. One window has a desk beneath it, the other a sofa. And as Staffe approaches the desk, he can see that he is above the alleyway that leads down to Joaquin's. Now he can work out where he is. There is a bridge that spans the alley from one building to the next. This is the bridge. He leans over the desk, presses his nose to the window, and sees people on their paseo, linking arms, eating ice cream cornets. There is nothing on the desk, save the last few copies of La Lente, an ashtray brimming with cigar stubs and a notebook. Staffe flicks through the notebook and sees nothing to catch the eye save the words Ech de Bateria, Cabeza, Toro. The name of his parents' killer, Head, Bull. Staffe sits at the desk and opens and closes the drawers. Most are empty. On one wall is a large tapestry and a bull's head, grandly mounted. On the other wall, the door is surrounded mainly by photographs of matadors, some signed to Raoul, with scrawled quips and fond messages. There is a photograph of a young Raoul with an old Manolito, Almeria's most famous killer of bulls. There is also a watercolour of an Alpujarran village, with a tinao in the foreground, and beneath a torn poster from the corrida of the 1989 Feria is a familiar swirl of colours. It is a small painting, in the artist's early style, depicting the High Sierra with pine trees and a snow-capped mountain. In the mid-distance is the Silla Montar above Almagen. It is an original, signed Barrington. Pepper appears by his side, smelling of soap, a hint of perfume. Staffe asks, "Did he ever talk to you about the mountains or his village?" "You're fond of your questions? I went out with a policeman once. It was a curse." "Charming. Raoul claimed to dislike Barrington, but he has one of his paintings." "He's a painting of his part of the world, and not exactly a bad investment. Besides," Pepper turns to look at the painting, "is hardly one of his finest pieces." "Could you take me to his office?" "All that is left of him is his work, his finished work." "What about his sources?" "He would have absolutely no records of his sources. Raoul was meticulous, but anything he needed he kept in his head." She prods her temple with her forefinger. "If you want to know Raoul, you have to read his work." She laughs and finishes her coffee. "It's exactly what he would want." "And where can I find his work? Buried in a vault somewhere, rotting?" "We were once a third-world country, but not any more. The owners of the paper commissioned an electronic archive 2 years ago. All editorial, news and feature articles are available online, provided you have the authority." "How far back does it go?" Staffe asks. But she is gone, holding a tissue to her nose. The man grips the African firmly by the forearm. The African's blue and yellow burnous now has smears of blood on one of the arms and at the hip. "Is this him?" From the window of Café Tanger, they watch the Englishman and the woman from La Lente walk away. "Well," says the man, "is it him?" The African bows his head, nods. "And what did you tell him?" The African shakes his head. "You're coming with me. We're not done yet." Behind the counter, 2 Moroccans stand, passive. They want to intervene, but know better. He is not to be messed with, they know. In this land there are battles you cannot win. The plastic greenhouses are golden, translucent in the dusk sun. Staffe asks the taxi driver to stop by the nitrophos drum. "Here," says Pepper. She's wearing her dark suit from the funeral and Prada shades. Staffe strides ahead, wending left and then right, and soon they are lost amongst the plastic. He pauses where the African in the burnous had been, and Pepper catches up, her heels snagging in the dirt. "Was it here?" "There was a man, a Moroccan as black as the peak of a Quepo's cap. I spoke to him." "And what did he say?" "Nothing, but he showed me water being poured into a man, I think." In a clearing, between 2 sorry-looking plastic sheds, 2 Moroccans sit on their haunches outside a hut made with corrugated roof pieces and pallets. One of them is in a Chicago Bulls vest, and the other is bare-chested and wearing toweling jogging bottoms. They look stoned and stare at the ground as Staffe approaches. He says, "There is a man who wears a blue and yellow burnous. Where is he?" The men seem worried and shake their heads without looking up. "I can help him." They shake their heads again. Pepper goes into her handbag and pulls out a small block of resin, maybe a spliff or 2 shy of an eighth. She holds it out to them, says, "He's right.
We can help him.
The men look at each other, and one of them says, "You police. You can't trap us." Pippa pulls out her press card, shows it to them. "We are not police. Just tell us, and we are gone. You never see us again." "You got anything more?" says the one in the bull's vest. He casts a lazy smile towards Pepper, and the sun catches a ruby stud in his left ear. Pepper puts the raisin away, says, "You missed out." "No!" He holds out his hand. "You mean Yusuf? Now give it to me." Pepper hands him the resin. The man with the bull's vest and the ruby stud inspects it and stands up, walks away, and when he's 20 metres away he pulls out a knife. It is a small, old penknife, but he looks as if he could stick you with it. He says, "They beat him. Then they took him away."
Who took him?
"Who do you think?"
The police.
"Not police, but something close. You can tell when people are beyond the law."
End of Disc 2. Disc 3.
Chapter 10. Staffe hangs up the phone. Because of what happened to his parents, he never completed his degree, but he kept in touch with a couple of his friends from Merton College. A few years ago he bumped into David Grice, a short-lived best friend. They went for a pint, and Grice had told him there was a Geordie coming up, and that he was on the committee and could get Will on the list if he would come. At the Geordie, Staffe had talked to Jasper Newton, who knew all about his parents. Jasper's specialism is Spain, and in particular its civil war. The following week he had called Jasper to talk more about ETA, Santi Estebateria, and their real levels of activity. This morning, 5 years on, he called Jasper again, to inquire about methods and rituals of torture. Jasper described several types of torture leading to execution, and Staffe's stomach slowly turned and turned until the professor's supply of the horrific was exhausted. "Did you ever hear of anybody being buried and made to drink?" "Ah, the Caligula," Newton had said. "Caligula liked to seal off the root for a man's piss. He'd use twine and then pour water into his victims until the bladder bloated and finally burst. Well, the Spanish weren't as cruel as all that, but what they would do, to extract information, was bury a man, usually kneeling, up to his neck in the earth, and then pour water into him. It would be fast and furious, and the man would feel like he was drowning." It sounds like waterboarding. This was the real thing. They would put a peg in the earth and use their belts to hold the poor man's head back so his face pointed to the sky. It's just one of many... He had paused, said nothing more. Staffe is shown through the small comedor of the Quinta Toro. There are 2 besuited 50-year-old men at the bar, swigging brandy as if it is nothing to be ashamed of at 11 in the morning. The room is adorned head to toe with bullfighting posters and photographs, including one of Angel, the bar's owner, shaking hands with King Juan Carlos. Otherwise, the place is empty. Jesus, the young officer who was at the plastic greenhouse, is in his father's tiny office, which has crates of beer and boxes of broad beans and sacks of potatoes stacked high. He stubs out a cigarette and immediately lights another, says, "You come asking about him, and 3 days later he's in the ground." Staffe sits on a beer barrel on the opposite side of the room to Jesus. "I don't believe in chance. There is a reason why people do things, a reason for everything that happens. That's all that we do as police. We find out why." "He was drunk." "The dead man in the plastic was tortured, wasn't he?" Tortured? Jesus' eyes are wide. He stubs out his cigarette on the floor. I'll bet there was a peg in the ground. Tell me, Jesus, am I right? And were there marks on his forehead? I was standing guard outside, that's all. Did you cut the rope that held him, or was it a belt? And did you have to dig him out of there? Did you lay him out and make it look as if he'd taken just a little too much heroin? Jesus leans forward and sighs heavily. What's it to you? Was he dead before they put him in the ground? According to Manolo, Jesus got his job in the Guardia because of who his father is, because of this place. Knowing where his papa salopobre are sautéed, the young man isn't talking. He says it by leaving. From her desk, Peppa can see the castellated towers of the Alcazar. She thinks about the history, wonders if she did the best thing coming to the city when her family wanted her to stay in Gabo. She looks down at her notes on the latest batch of demolition orders. Her instructions from the chief of the newspaper are to shame the outgoing mayor. She is to report how preposterous it is that these demolitions, urbanizations bought off-plan and principally by the English, are being pushed through. A door swings open. Her chief chews violently on his nicotine gum, holds his head high, pince-nez balanced on the bridge of his nose. I saw you at the funeral, Peppa, and I saw you leave. Where did you go with your new friend? I think he likes me, that's all. She says this knowing he doesn't. That, or he is a cold fish. You know, Raoul was a fine man. The chief glazes over, looks wistfully at the Alcazar. He could be a fine man when he allowed it, and he was a friend. He pulls up a chair. His reputation is his legacy. It's all he leaves behind, and we must protect him now. Now it's too late. There is no story here, do you understand? Peppa has to look away. Such is the intensity of the way he looks at her. The feria is coming, and there's no space for new copy. We have to report the casetas and the corrida. You know how it is. You mean we shut up? Raoul's demise leaves a vacancy. It will be advertised, of course, but I expect you to apply, and I expect your application to be strong. We mourn, we move on. New life shoots up from beneath. That's nature. Staffe pulls up by the bridge on the Messina road in his hire car, a Cinquecento. Squeezing himself in at the Attesa depot, he'll chuckle to himself, wondering if, in any estimation, he could be a Quixote. He doesn't know what he is tilting at, for sure. As soon as he left the coastal plain, the Fiat began to struggle on the mountain passes. This car, quite appropriately, is more donkey than horse-powered. He eases himself out of the tiny vehicle, and two workmen, resting in the shade of an olive tree, interrupt their lunch of ham and beer to laugh at him. The workmen have been tasked with repairing the bridge. The police tape has already been taken down, bundled up beneath the idling cement mixer. The bridge railings comprise a 5-centimetre metal tubing frame, painted blue and stuck into a knee-high concrete base. Staffe approaches the bridge and is confused. The men appear to be working at its wrong end, the eastern Messina end. Raoul had breached the bridge at its western end, that is to say, on the Almagen side. Staffe peers down into the ravine, looks for the blood-soaked rag, colours of the Spanish flag, but he can't see it. It was directly below the bridge, not 20 yards from the crashed car, but now it is gone. One of the men stands up and strolls up to Staffe, holding his bocadillo of ham like a club. You can't stand there. Is this a new accident? Staffe points at their handiwork. The man shrugs. You can't stand there. Staffe thinks it odd that the men are repairing damage which presents no threat to the motorist, while at the other end of the bridge is a gaping hole that any car could easily go sailing through, the bridge being on a tight downhill bend. The accident was at the other end, right? He peers over the bridge into the barranco. The dry bed of the Rio Messina is 60 feet below, and Raoul's Alpha Spider is still down there, his red boot pointing towards Almagen. You can't stand there. Raoul could only have gone into the barranco on his way out of the village, but the damage at the other end of the bridge suggests that perhaps another vehicle had come at him. Was there a car coming the other way? Is that what you're repairing? The workman sighs. Staffe peers back down into the barranco, focusing on the Alpha's bonnet. Caved in on its left hand, driver's side, from the impact with the bridge's rails. The front of the bonnet is partially crushed from the slide down the hillside into the riverbed. But Staffe's curiosity is touched by something he sees on the car's right-hand wing. He bids the workman farewell, and as he goes along the bridge, he runs his hand along the blue-painted rail, shiny and smooth, but then rough, where the paint is taken away. Thin streaks of red run along the rail. He pauses, watches the workman return to his lunch. For 3 meters before the breach that the men are working on, the paint is scratched from the bridge's 2 rails. Just before he gets to where his Cinquecento is parked, Staffe darts down the side of the bridge and clambers down the barranco. The workmen shout at him, but he doubts they will bother to follow. The brambles scratch his arms as he grabs them to stop himself from tumbling, and he has to throw himself onto his back to avoid toppling over. The sun beats down ferociously on the valley bottom, and he is drenched in sweat, crouching by Raoul's Alpha. He peruses one side of the car, and his suspicion is confirmed. On the car's right-hand wing, 2 thin strips of blue run like tramlines, where the Alpha had surely crashed into the railings, on the side the men were repairing, the wrong side. The workmen lean over, shouting down at him. He looks up, and the barranco now seems steeper. The bridge is a long way off. Tilting at bloody something, he thinks, ignoring the workman's calls and looking in the dry riverbed for the blood-soaked rag, finding nothing of the sort. Just the rogue bush of wild strawberries. Fruit withered and dry, but with a cluster of leaves petalled red with a smear of what could be blood, fully 20 meters from Raoul's dead car. When Staffe parks up in the Placeta, his neighbour, Carmen, beckons him from the alley that leads to his house. Carmen could be anywhere between 45 and 70. She smokes the local black tobacco as she tells him that his landlord has been to the house. He came with another man, and they had entered the house despite her protestations. When she'd stood in their way, the other man had laid hands on her, and they had locked the door behind them so she couldn't even oversee what they were up to. "Here," she says, touching her shoulder as if it were a wound. "Here, he touched me. They said they had come to check that the water and the gas were working, but that man had never seen a spanner in his life. A plumber! Mother of God!" Staffe opens the door to his house and can immediately tell someone has been in, because they double-lock the door when they're left, something he never does. He quickly goes up to the small studio that leads out onto the roof. As he goes through his papers, Carmen huffs and puffs behind him, the sweet black tobacco preceding her. He checks what few documents he has, sees nothing is missing. His camera is still there, his laptop too. But when he stands back and reappraises the position of everything, something is wrong. He sits in the corner of the studio, in the old rocking chair with the padded hide arms. From here, he can see all of Gador. If you sit there for an hour, in the morning or evening, the big mountain constantly changes colour. It's where he sits with his laptop, and when he's done, he places it on the sideboard. But when he reaches for it now, even at full stretch, it is beyond. Someone has moved it. He fires it up and tries to log in. As he does, about to type in the last digit of his password, he is alerted to a message. He has one remaining attempt to log in. Carmen bends double at the top of the steep stairs, hands on knees, getting her breath, and still pulling on the cigarette that hasn't left her mouth. "Is there anything wrong?" she pants. "No, Carmen, I remember now. I did call the landlord about the hot water for my shower. It was a couple of weeks ago, but at least he's come now." She looks at him as if she knows his game, goes out onto the roof terrace, and tells him he shouldn't have lavender pots up here. He should grow a vine for shade. If he did, she could water it for him and train it. She laughs, says he will never learn how to live here properly. Carmen pulls the dead lavender from its pot and hurls it over the walnut tree and into the campo. As she does it, Carmen catches the eye of Consuela, hanging her washing on the roof opposite. Carmen tuts and sits down heavily, eyes up an unopened bottle of anise del mono that Manolo brought once. Staffe asks if she would like a glass, and she shrugs, lets him pour. Tells him she can get him a cutting from a vine. "Why don't you like Consuela, Carmen?" he says in a low voice. "Nobody knows who the wretched child's father is. You need to choose your friends more wisely. That Manolo is no better." Carmen watches him plug in the dongle to his laptop and lights up another of her black cigarettes. He taps away at the keyboard, then pauses, wondering whether to send, going outside while he decides. He has a glass of anise del mono with Carmen and accepts a drag on her cigarette. It takes him back to a previous time, and he returns to the computer, presses the return key, and his request pings across the sky to Jasper Newton. That he might arrange an audience with his good friend and one-time comrade, Professor Peralta, in the School of Military History at the University of Granada. Staffe recharges Carmen's glass and hears a dog barking across the roofs. When he looks, he's sure he sees the tail end of Suki, tucked under Gracia's arm as she disappears through the hatch of their roof. Manolo doesn't go anywhere without his Suki. Salva nods politely to Staffe as he goes into Bar Fuente. He is putting up more posters for the new Academia. Now they propose it will be called the Academia Barrington. It will bring tourists flocking. As Staffe works his way around the bar, the tinny clatter of conversation that normally rings off the tiles dims quickly to an awkward silence. When Salva brings his mint tea, Staffe asks, "No Manolo today?" Salva looks at him suspiciously. "He was up the mountain with that journalist friend of yours." "Well, I haven't seen him since then. He wasn't at the funeral." "Why would he be?" says Frog, talking around his wagging Duro cigarette. "He didn't really know that cunt from Almeria. None of us did, you understand." "The junta decide any day now," says Salva, tapping the poster. "It could be the making of us." "Our very own Academia Cultural," says Frog, as if this is cafe society. "We don't want any boats capsizing.
It was you that brought that journalist here, remember? You and your friend Manolo. That man's sick in the head. He's not. He's a shepherd. That's all he is, so why would he hang out with some fancy journalist from Almeria? The man's off his rocker. You saw him go for me the other day. The whole fucking family is howling at the moon.
You're the one who's thick in the head, says Staffe.
It's time you fucked off back to where you came from.
Staffe stirs his tea, waiting for it to cool, and the old goats at the bar mooch off one by one. Usually a departure is a trigger for buffoonery and chidings as to who invited who for a drink, but today each bill is settled singly and quietly. When they are alone, Salva comes across to Staffe, says in the quietest of confidences, "You didn't hear this from me?" Staffe nods. "Manolo called round. He's gone to see his father in the hospederia in Granada." "Which one?" "He didn't want you to worry." "Please tell me, Salva. He's left Suki here." Salva looks over each shoulder again and passes his wedding finger across his pursed lips. "Our Lady of Mercy in the Albaicin." Staffe drinks his tea, feels the potion settle his stomach. He says, "Not everybody wants this cultural academy, is that right?" "If they know what's good for the village, they'll want it." "Well, I was talking to Edu before. He says it's a bad thing."
"Well, Edu has his own crops to harvest."
Salva goes into the kitchen, and Staffe calls Professor Peralta at the School of Military History to confirm their meeting. He feels the tug of Granada, remembers what Jasper Newton had said of his compadre. "Old Peralta, he likes to lift the carpet, blow all the dirt out where it can be seen." Chapter 11. Marie is cooking peppers on a barbecue outside El Nido, beneath a bamboo canopy. She's put on a few kilos over and above the baby, and her eyes are bright. Staffe thinks she suits the colour of her skin, and her hair is shiny, brushed all the way through and longer now. She looks reborn. Harry sits at the head of the table, in Paolo's absence, poking away at his handheld virtuality. His brow is thick, and his mouth set rigid. "Put that thing down, Harry," says Marie. She fills Staffe's glass with half wine, half water. "Those blasted games. That machine makes him so uptight." Staffe whispers, "He's doing all right in the real world." "Shut up, you two!" Harry slams down his device and stares at his uncle. "Come here and apologise." Marie pats her lap and beckons her petulant son, but Harry stamps from the table. As he goes, he shouts, "Why can't we live in a proper house?" "Oh, my," says Marie. "I think he's worried about the new one." She taps her swollen tummy and smiles at her brother. "I don't know why. We've involved him all along. He knows what's going on." Staffe thinks, Jesus, no wonder he's playing up, telling him what's going on in there. "What did you mean about him doing all right in the real world?" Staffe ponders whether to tell her about Gracia, and how the boys tease Harry and shut him out. "Nothing. Just he's got friends in the village." He breaks off a chunk of bread, dips it in the thick salmorejo that Marie has made from tomatoes and garlic, olive oil and stale bread. "Go on." "What do you mean?" "I know you will. There's something else you want to say." "Did you ever think about getting a house in the village? For winter? It would be closer to Harry's friends, and when the baby comes, it might suit to have proper facilities. And everything we left behind in England. We could get Sky TV, too. That's not what I said. We came to be in the mountains, close to nature. And while you're in the mountains, Paolo is in Orchiva, right? He's gone to get seeds. They're cheap down there. And Jackson gave him a lift. It saves on petrol. Staffe bites his tongue. I'm sorry. I think you're doing great. He leans across, holds her hand. I'm glad you're here. It's good for Harry. He adores you. I don't know what was wrong with him earlier. Staffe returns to his salmorejo, and Marie goes back to the fire, turns her peppers. So you're off to Granada, she calls. Can you bring me some saffron from the market? And hey, you drive carefully. Did you hear about that nonsense the other day? A man killed himself on the Messina Road, that damn bridge. Killed himself? Well, he was blind drunk, apparently. It was that fellow who came up with Manolo the other day. Oh, my God, no! You said you'd seen him up here. What exactly happened when he came before? He was with Manolo, messing about in the woods, I think. We were in the meadow bringing in the tobacco. She winked at her brother, miming the dragging upon a joint. He looks past her, to the woods. Orchiva is halfway to Granada on the Guadalfeo River. It is a beautiful town with a grand church and a seven-eye bridge, nestling in a delta. Less than a century ago, it was a barbed front line between Franco and the Communists. Peace came, and with it, hippies from Northern Europe. They sought what they couldn't get at home and turned it into a shitty corner of Amsterdam. The Dragon Bar is down a side street off the Rambla, where the market is held. You can find it with your eyes shut by following the sound of Bob Marley and the smell of weed. But Staffe has his eyes open, clocks Jackson and Paolo at a table in the corner, where they are drinking cubatas with a 40-something woman with overdone kohl, a singlet top and denim miniskirt. He reckons her tits have been done. "Will," says Paolo, a smile tattooed on his face, but the fear of a caught man in his eyes. The woman says, "Hello?" Staffe thinks she sounds German. Jackson is busy rolling a fat cigarette. This is his world. A scrawny place from when Vietnam went pear-shaped and cream split up. Staffe says to Jackson, "Shouldn't you be back in the village, answering questions?" "What do you mean?" says Paolo, slurring his words. Jackson carries on preparing his joint. He says something in German that makes the woman look at Staffe, then laugh. "Raoul spent the night at yours, and the next morning he's dead." Jackson drawls, "Maybe I could have a minute to chew the fat with our dude here." The woman looks disappointed, but scoops up a drink. "Maybe you should go too," says Staffe to Paolo. "If you don't know Raoul, this doesn't concern you." He would willingly drag Paolo into this situation were it not for Marie and Harry and the new baby. "And steer clear of that stray." The German woman turns and glares, but Paolo, passing her, says something to make her move on. Staffe says to Jackson, "Don't the police want to talk to you?" "You don't know anything at all about me. I'm damn sure you have a balsa full of preconceptions, but this isn't your country, so you can take your police ways and shove 'em where your shit stinks." Jackson's eyes harden. His lips retract to a thin line. His voice is lower, deeper. He leans forward, suddenly looks as if he could damage somebody. You got nothing to frighten me with, you son of a bitch. And if you ever embarrass me in front of my friends, or anyone I choose to hang out with, or even someone I just want to screw, you'll rue the fucking day. And you will rue the fucking day, Jackson. Staffe leans forward too, his heart beating fast, thinking that maybe Jackson has a trick from Indo-Asia that could pluck his Adam's apple from his throat. Yes? What made you invite Raul Gutierrez into your world? Don't be so fucking dramatic, man. Jackson leans back, takes his drink with him. He holds the glass like a weapon. I invited him for dinner. In fact, he invited himself for dinner. He got wasted on my whiskey and then drove down the mountain into a ditch and killed himself. An inglorious end, but it's not my fault. It's nobody's fault. He was in the village a few weeks ago. Something must have drawn him, says Staffe. He's a fucking journalist. They sniff like dogs, but there isn't always heat. And what about Manolo? He's missing. He's a fucking shepherd. It's his job to go missing. Have you checked out the goats? He's not with them. His dog is in the village. Me and Bobby McGee comes on and Jackson smiles. His eyes are warm and he sips his cubata of whiskey and coke, puts his feet up on the seat of the stool next to Staffe. A bit of a cliché, Jackson. Maybe, but not for me. I hate the fucking song. He blows a kiss to the girl behind the bar. She is young and slim and fresh and has a smile too dirty for her years. But she thinks I like it. That's why I love this place, man. It's out of time. That night, up at your cotijo, Raul said he was going to tell me something he didn't want anyone else to know. Well, maybe it was Barrington. I think he had a thing about Barrington. It was the fucking academy, I bet. What do you think about the academy? It'll bring tourists in, money and jobs. I won't suit everybody. Me, I came here for the quiet life. I think Raul had something to tell me about that body down in the plastic. Oh, maybe Santi Estebaderia. What? Says Staffe. What do you know about him? Raul and Manolo were talking about you. Whatever it was he was going to tell me, I'll find out. Jackson laughs, as if he hasn't a care in all the world. Talking to the dead now. Maybe you could ask Janice where she left all the drugs. Looking at him leaning back and dragging on his joint, Staffe thinks that maybe Jackson really does have nothing to worry about. Jackson says, Look, man, I've nothing against you. I invited you into my home and we parted. I like your sister and Paolo's not so bad. But I've been here 40 years and I haven't a clue how this country operates. So take my advice and get yourself better. Get over what's happened. I'm not like that. Someone died in that plastic. You've seen what's going on down there. The Gulf Wars. Too right. You ask me, it's something to do with money. And if I'm right, it'll never get sorted out, not in this country. Money, says Staffe. It's never far away. Staffe has walked past the indigo-coloured door twice. It has an iron grille the size of his paperback. He stoops and looks through into a sloping garden of cypress trees, bougainvillea, and roses which border a pedicured, well-watered lawn of deep green. It all leads up to a grand carmen with filigree iron balconies and finely worked wooden shutters. He walked past the door twice because he was looking for the kind of place they would put a section shepherd from the mountains, some functional, modern building built in the concrete and nasty fashion of the Generalissimo. This place, the Ospederia of Our Lady of Mercy, is the opposite. Staffe presses the bell, and when a nun, dressed in white and with an equally pale face, comes to the gate, he says, through the grille as if genuflecting, and in his most proper Castellano Spanish, "I am Guillermo Wagstaff, and I'm a friend of Manolo Cano. His father is a resident, and they call him Rubio." She nods and slides a wooden shutter across the grille. He waits. 10 minutes later, the wooden shutter slides back to reveal the troubled face of Manolo. The nun stands behind him. Manolo seems anxious and says, "I am visiting my father. Why do you intrude?" "I know you and Raoul met weeks ago up the mountain." "I am here to see my father, if you don't mind." "Why did you take me to see your Tio and then to the plastic?" "I wanted you to try the papas allo pobre. They are the finest. I was trying to be kind." "If I hadn't gone with you that day, I wouldn't have tracked down Raoul." "I won't rest." All right, Manolo says to the nun. "He's fine. He is a family friend. I just didn't know he was coming today. He can come in, if it is acceptable to you." Rubio is writing into a leather-bound notebook at a desk by the tall window of his room, which looks over the flat-roofed white houses of the Albaicin to the Alhambra Palace. As confinements go, it's not a bad one. The nun leaves, and Rubio closes his notebook. Stands. A slim, broad-shouldered, still handsome man with blonde hair and the bluest eyes. He doesn't look the slightest bit mad. He puts his notebook on a small pile of identical leather-bound notebooks, ensures the pile is perfectly straight. Looking at Staffe, he says to his son, "Who is this foreigner you bring to my home?" "Father, I don't see anyone for years, and now you bring men with you. Won't you ever get married? Ever bear me a grandchild, you lady boy?" Staffe sits on the edge of the bed and says, "How do you get on with the nuns?" Rubio's eyes lighten a little, and his mouth creases into a smile. "God would never forgive me." "When did you ever care about God, Papa?" "You care more when you can hear the harps, believe me. But I tell you, there's a couple of nurses come round to check on me. Force to your dick." Rubio laughs, but quickly corrects himself. "What is it you came for?" "Your friend, Raoul Gutierrez." "I don't know any Gutierrez." "He died, Rubio," says Staffe, watching closely as Rubio's eyes blink rapidly. With a crack in his voice, he says, "It's sad, of course, when someone dies, even if you don't know them." Staffe says, "And Astrid? Where is your wife, Rubio?" "Leave him!" shouts Manolo. "Do you know a man called Jackson Roberts?" says Staffe. "He's American." "Get out!" shouts Rubio. "What are these questions?" He glares at Manolo. "You don't visit since... and now you bring him. Who is he?" A nun comes to the door, says, "We cannot have this shouting, or you must leave." "Rubio, tell me what Raoul was looking for in Almagen," pleads Staffe. Rubio shakes his head. He jigs his knee up and down and wrings his hands, turns away from Staffe and his own son to look up to the Alhambra. A small perfection beneath God's mountains. The mountains that were Rubio's domain, until something stopped that, and it passed to his son. "Come," insists the nun, and she shows Staffe and Manolo back to the indigo door, colder than a fish this time around.
"What were you thinking? Upsetting my papa like that? You must stop this questioning."
"Must I, Manolo?" They are in a gitano bar in the Albaicin. Staffe switches his wallet to his front pocket as they settle at the bar. He continues, "What is it exactly that you don't like about the questions?" Manolo can't look Staffe in the eye, says nothing. "In Jackson's cotijo you told me that you knew plenty. Those were your exact words."
"I was drunk."
"You were afraid of something, and you still are." Manolo slams down his canna of beer.
"There is plenty you don't know about me. You don't have to know everything about everything, Guilly."
"Raoul was going to tell me something the day he died."
"What would life be like without secrets? You know all about secrets."
"Yes, and I told you about my parents. Raoul knew about my parents. And Jackson Roberts."
"Raoul's a journalist, for the love of Christ. You spend time with a journalist. What do you expect?"
"And that journalist has a Barrington on his wall. How could he afford such a thing?"
"I never knew the Englishman. I remember the funeral. It was a big thing. You want to know about Barrington? Just ask your friend Edu. He was there."
"There?"
"At the funeral. It was a big thing. I just wish I could have been there, seen everything."
"But Edu didn't like Barrington."
"Secrets," says Manolo, paying for the drinks. "I need the toilet, and then we should leave."
"What were you and Jackson arguing about that night in his cotijo?"
"I can't remember. It's a mystery to me."
As he goes, deadly earnest, Manolo says,
"If secrets are meant to be revealed, they will be, but friends should behave like friends. Friends will do anything for each other. Anything, right?"
"Of course." Manolo slaps Staffe on the shoulder and smiles thinly with sad eyes.
"Then we are friends. We all have secrets, even friends. But I will tell you what you need to know. If I can, I will do it. And that, my friend, is a promise."
Staffe waits at the bar and finishes his drink, busies himself with eating his tapa of sardines. He's getting better at leaving no flesh, just the spine and head, which the locals seem able to do by simply putting the whole fish into the mouth and immediately withdrawing it through closed lips. He turns to watch a young man in the corner who is singing. He has a dirty face and knotted, shoulder-length hair, wears a white shirt open to the waist and tight black jeans, high Cuban heels which he stamps on the offbeat. The barman claps out a rhythm, and the young man closes his eyes, sings a soleá. When he is done, the singer leaves, reaching down, adjusting the fit of the long-bladed knife in his boot. Staffe looks around for Manolo. The toilet is a tiny cubicle with room for only one person at a time. He walks across, presses the door. It swings open, empty. Manolo is not in the bar, nor is he in the plazeta opposite, where a gang of heroin-thin, swarthy men have gathered, swigging from bottles of beer and sucking on joints. When he pays, Staffe asks the bartender if he saw his friend leave.
"If he left without saying goodbye, he's not your friend,"
is all he says, trousering the money and nodding to the street as if to say, "Go on, this time you left, you're not our type." Outside, the evening has become night. Staffe mulls what Manolo had said about being friends and secrets being revealed, saying he will tell him what he needs to know. What might he need to know? There are fewer people now, and those who are left on the streets are local, male, and in groups of 3 or more. They talk closely to each other, scrawny-shouldered and hunched. They all wear the sharp boots with heels and room for more than a leg. He tries to avoid their eyes and puts his hand in his pocket, on his wallet, as the other in a fist, cocked. He works his way left and right through the maze of narrow winding streets, but comes full circle to the Gitano bar, which is full now. He goes the other way down the hill, and every chance he gets he takes the steepest lane down, knowing that his hotel, the Ladrón del Agua, is on the front line to the Rio Darro, which is surely at the bottom of the hill. When he gets to the church at the top of the steep streets of the Arab market, the Gitano singer is leaning against a shut-up shop. He steps out in front of Staffe, asks him what he's looking for. Does he want coke, or is it a fuck? Nothing. We all want something. He reaches down. Staffe thinks the man is going for a knife and walks quickly away. When he gets to the bottom of the next flight of steps, he turns, sees the singer is still watching him. He takes the next flight 2 at a time towards the lights of the Plaza Nueva just below. The city becomes warmer the lower he gets, and in the rhythm of his footsteps on the old stone, shining in the streetlight, he replays Manolo's words. Friends will do anything for each other. All the way to the door of his hotel, which is a different world. The houseboy, standing by the fountain in the patio andaluz, is dressed as a Berber, and nods respectfully, offers him a warm, wet towel to dab away the dirt of the day. Chapter 12. The Hospital Isabella is not a hospital. Its cloisters echo with learning, not suffering, for it now houses the University of Granada's Faculty of History. But this time of year, the rooms for private study looking out into the courtyard are all unused. A gnarled old man dressed in a dark suit takes Staffe up a broad staircase to meet Professor Peralta. In his grand room, Peralta is halfway up a ladder reaching for a book from the ceiling-high cases. He waves Staffe in, asks how his friend the Jasper is getting on. Staffe tells him he seemed very well when they spoke, and thanks the professor for seeing him at such short notice. Peralta turns his back and resumes the quest for his book, overreaching for the volume. Staffe thinks he is about to fall, and the old man in the dark suit chides him. But the book is successfully plucked, and Peralta descends. Says, "You are delving into a terrible war, so the Jasper tells me. I am afraid I am interested in the methods of killing." Peralta shakes his head. "They found every way to kill a man in those insane years." He pauses, reordering his thoughts. "Each side was as bad as the other. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. One lot, in the name of everything egalitarian, and with capital behind them, were killing priests and raping nuns. The others sought out Reds where there weren't any and executed them anyway, with the most horrible methods." Staffe said, "The method I think I know is truly terrible. I am putting the finishing touches to a conference next spring. For me, the integrity of the sourcing and verification must be impeccable. I have an academic deity to answer to, and what you tell me may be published." "What I know is hearsay, I'm afraid." "You are asking me to be frank and honest, Senor Wagstaff. So you must be the same. All I can say is that there is a crime under investigation. The Cuerpos seem to have a solution. But let us imagine— I cannot imagine, senor. 2 men are dead. The man in the plastic, is he one? That was a simple case of druggies killing each other. It made the papers here in Granada. A simple case? I suspect not. What if he'd been buried to his neck and had his head strapped back and drowned? Drowned in the earth? Am I right? Staffe nods. That is what I'm speculating about. You said there were 2 dead. The other is a journalist. Aha, Gutierrez. I never met him, but we get some of his feature articles in the Granada La Lente. They say he drove into a barranco as drunk as a monkey. It was he who covered the body in the plastic story. Is it to do with the golf? Tell me about the water method. I have heard of such a method. The Jasper would call them Caligulas, but they are not. That's just his Anglo-Saxon predilection. We don't obsess about the Romans the way you do. Here, those few who talk about that method, we call them ladrones. There were executions claimed in the name of war, but were really to avenge matters of life. It is such things that underline the civil in our civil war, and precisely the abominations that made it such a terrible war, are beyond the imagination. The killings were over water. For some, the war was a screen. Imagine your grandfather stole land, or more importantly, water, from my grandfather. My family lived destitute for 3 generations, and then the war comes and they are with the nationalists. I call myself a Republican, and I take your life, and your land, and my water back. I call it war, and when the war is done, the war is done. We bury the war and let the water rise, Senor Wagstaff. We preoccupy ourselves with getting on with the peace. And these crimes were committed by fascists. It depends. Certainly once they were in the ascendancy, but everyone was tainted. Ladrones, muses Staffe, smiling to himself. You have a strange sense of humour, senor. My hotel is the Ladrón del Agua. I know it. It is for our new generation a special place. Perhaps it bodes well. From her room, which remains precisely as she left it when she moved away from Gabo 10 years ago, Peppa can see the lunar dune. It is 100 meters high, and for half her life she wondered how the wind didn't take it. Then her brother Hilario told her it is the wind that put it there, keeps it here. Soon after, her brother was taken by the sea. Above her bed is her prize poster of Quadrophenia. Hilario bought it from a website. It is signed by Pete Townsend, and she looks away from it and back out to sea, remembers her brother. She feels sad and puts on a CD, plays Won't Get Fooled Again at full blast, and waits for her father to come stamping up the stairs. It is her joke, to make her less sad, and she hides behind the door waiting for him to come storming in, shouting, "Turn it down," which he does, and she jumps out from behind the door and hugs him tight, her hands clasped tight around his chest and her face snuggled into his neck. She can smell the sea on him. He's only a small man, a fisherman who did very well from all the fancy restaurants which the village sprouted in the boom. When the peseta turned euro, a black day for all Spain, according to her father, a spanking new Mercedes had appeared in the garage, and a new fishing boat was bought, kept on a stand in Motril. The Merc goes out when they go to weddings and christenings. The boat has never been in the water.
"I am so proud of you, my Peppa," he says.
She holds her breath. Daren't tell him that for all her fancy clothes and expensive habits, she is slowly, surely, drowning in debt. They hold each other tight for a while, and her father eventually says,
"Turn it down for your mother's sake. I don't understand all this foreign business that consumes you. Where did that come from? It breaks my heart that you are not happy to be truly Spanish." "I am, Papa. I love Spain. I love Gabo and all my friends here." "But you live with the Moors in the city."
Peppa chastises him, but he knows only what he knows. Fishing for his life, he has to fear everything he doesn't know, and who knows the sea? Even this Mediterranean, a sea he has fished all his life, holds terrible depths. In these waters, and especially in winter, God can take you. When Hilario was 16, and she 2 years younger, he had left school to learn his father's trade. They hit rocks off Agua Amarga, and the boat capsized. Her father had dived and dived until he found Hilario. He brought him home and carried him into the house, across his arms like an offertory. Tears stained into his salt cheeks. Her father looked at the poster Hilario bought for her, using his first wage packet. As if it's too much for him to bear, he gives her a lingering kiss on each cheek, holds her by the shoulders, and says he will see her at dinner. Peppa returns to her papers. There is a whole list of denuncias relating to new building projects across Andalusia, and one of them relates to a local developer who has built a 4-star hotel 2 bays away from Gabo, and right on an idyllic cove. As usual, the outgoing mayor who granted the permissions, and who is now living in Fuerteventura in a massive villa, is being shamed, and the new mayor has swept him with his new brush. Peppa spends a couple of hours going through the demolition order on the new hotel, cursing the legal system. When she is done, she goes back to the list of denuncias. Near the top is Almagen, an order against an English couple, the Harbinsons. Last winter, the Harbinsons' cortijo on the edge of the village suffered storm damage, like everyone else in the Alpujarras. The banks of their acequia, which serves water for all the farms below them, had burst. As a result, many villages had been denied their water, hence the denuncia. But once the town hall looked at it and visited the Harbinsons, they declared the entire small holding illegal. As it stands, the house is set to be demolished after a final court hearing in Granada. She looks up a contact she has at the London Times. Every now and again she writes as a stringer for him, and this hard-luck story of paradise gone sour could appeal. She makes the call, wondering what the English policeman will be sniffing around at right now. What use he might be. Jackson lets himself into the apartment at Realejo. When he first came to Granada, Realejo was a down-at-heel barrio, and its Campo de Príncipe was filled with furtive lovers and kids scoring dope. Now the streets are lined with trendy bars and shops selling objets d'art, and the Campo is like any piazza in any proud city in the world. The food's gone downhill, but the menus are in 4 languages. He bought his place, which is the top floor of an 18th century house next to the Church of Santo Domingo, in 1985. Jackson gave $6,000 for it, and earlier today an agent came round to see him and sucked his teeth and banged on about El Crisis. Finally said he would struggle to get $250,000 for it. The apartment has a knock-through living room with a kitchen in one corner. On the northern side of the apartment is his old studio, though it is years since he painted. Now, whenever he comes, it is the opposite side of the building which sees the action. Today he feels nostalgic and unlocks the walk-in cupboard in the studio and takes out his stack of 6 Barringtons, lines them up along the wall like captured soldiers. He gets a bottle of wild turkey and pours himself a tumbler, rolls a joint and leans back in his Barcelona chair. He looks and drinks, looks and smokes, does it some more and remembers those bad times. The best. "You fucker, Barrington. You bad fucker," he says, as wild turkey slowly disappears. He fleshes out a sketch of Yolanda in pen and ink from memory. The northern light, which he prefers, fades quickly, and his thoughts turn to Manolo. Poor Manolo. He telephones Yolanda and counts out €100 for her. She's been on his back for a little extra. Actually, quite a bit extra, but that is all she's getting. While he waits, he puts on Patti Smith, full blast, and showers long and hard one-handed. From the other, he drinks the wild turkey from the bottle. Remembers more about the bad old days. It brings a little something to his face. Yolanda is upset because Jackson doesn't want to talk. He doesn't kiss her, and isn't at all charming. It takes him ages, too, and all the time she's down on him, he looks at those infernal paintings, muttering to himself. She spits him out, and takes the €100 he laid out. "You don't have what I asked for." "That's plenty," he says, pouring himself a glass of bourbon. "You want some?" "I told you I need a little extra." "A little extra? Well, ask someone else." "And you ask someone else, you bastard." "I could do that." "They wouldn't put up with you. No one would. We're done. All done. And don't call me. Not ever." Yolanda fixes herself and slips the money into her clothes, then storms towards the door. But Jackson blocks the doorway, holds her and says, "Don't be like that." Taking her by the shoulders, he turns around, asks her which of the paintings she likes best. "Fuck yourself!" He digs into his trousers on the back of the chair and slips a €50 note between her tits. "I need more." "Tell me, which is the best?" Without hesitating, she points at the one on the end, by the window. "That one." It's a seascape, with 3 people aboard a boat. In a tiny portion of the tempestuous canvas there is a love story. It is, quite simply, genius, in a way which the other Barringtons are not. "I could love you, baby," he says. "You know that, don't you?" "You could show your appreciation." His dick points up at her, hard as oak. Some women have said they don't know how he does it. "You chose right, baby, but that's all you're getting." "I never chose right my whole life. You treat me right next time." "It's been a funny couple days." When Yolanda is gone, Jackson puts Patti Smith back on, and, as she swaggers through Redondo Beach, kind of like it's out of the corner of her mouth but also absolutely from the centre of her soul, Jackson carefully places the seascape love painting to one side. He puts the rest of the canvases face down all over the floor, and with a hammer and chisel, one by one, he dismantles the frames at each of their 4 corners. It takes until halfway through side 2 before he has a pile of wood and a stack of canvases. The wood he carries to the hearth and puts it with the logs that surround his wood-burning stove. The canvases, this thin pile of 5 Barringtons, each bearing the dead man's signature, he rolls up and secretes at the back of the cupboard. "It's a long time till fucking winter," he says aloud, looking at the stack of wood and flopping out on his daybed. He got the bed in Tangier on a weekend with Barrington. He laughs aloud, remembering how they stuffed 20 bricks of hashish into the mattress. "Bad old times, you fucker," he says, reaching across, pulling the wild turkey by its neck, and opens up his sketch pad. In pen and ink, he doodles around with his likeness of Yolanda, and slides slowly to a deep sleep, the monochrome her falling to ground. In Staffe's room in the Ladrón del Agua, a portrait of Lorca hangs beside photographs of old Granada. Lorca, killed by the general's men in the early days of the war. Peralta had told him that when Dali, supposedly a friend of Lorca's, heard that his friend was dead, he said, "Olé!" knowing that the general was set to prevail in the war. Even though he was a communist, Salvador was planning for the peace. He recalls something that Sylvie had said to him. Sylvie, probably the love of his life, if there is such a thing. A quarter French and wholly Catholic. Once said that he was an irredeemable Protestant, who had to constantly strive to impose a sense of what was right, what was just. "It has nothing to do with your job, Will," she had said. "That's simply a convenience for you. A pain in the arse for the rest of us. If only you could be like us. You could do your bit, fail, still see yourself as noble, and move on. Get on with your life." It has been many months since he felt the warm press of flesh on his, and he settles for his Monsignor Quixote and his fellow traveller, the deposed communist mayor, estranged but utterly placed in his deity. In the very first stage of sleep, he hears the book fall onto the cool floor, and visions of Manolo enter his dreams like bleeding watercolours. Chapter 13. Manolo's cortijo is the summer station for the goats to escape the blistering heat. It is up by the highest spring and the first throw of pines. Behind it, the Silla Montar, mountain gateway to Granada, swoops between the 2 highest peaks. Far away, Staffe can hear goat bells, but otherwise the place is deserted, and he feels ridiculous looking over his shoulder to make sure that nobody can see him as he pushes open the door to Manolo's mountain dwelling. It's a healthy instinct, perhaps. The door swings free. There will be no point locking it, and all that seems to be inside is a couple of butane bottles, flour and yeast, 2 pots, a knife, and a large bullwhip hung above the fireplace. Staffe checks all the corners of the main rooms and opens all the cupboards, then goes into the other 2 rooms. The first is full to waist-height with chopped pine. 2 mattresses take up most of the floor of the other room, and Staffe sniffs at something sweet in the air, steps over the mattresses to get to a chest under the tiny window. The chest is made from the local pine. Cleverly done, it is finished to the standards of a keen amateur, and as Staffe runs his fingers over the grain, he can picture Manolo sitting in the shade of a canopy of pines, his goats grazing, chiseling joints and sanding them smooth. He opens the shutters fully and sees where the smell is coming from. A goat carcass, strung up by its hind hooves, and with its head seemingly twisting round to face Staffe, has been hung too long. It is past its best, good only for its hide now. He gets the knife, which has a carved handle of a goat's head, the knife Staffe has seen Manolo using, or a perfect copy. He returns to the bedroom and upturns a log, stands on it, stretching, cutting down the goat. When he's done, he douses himself from the outside tap and returns to the bedroom, kneels by the chest and opens it. Amongst the brightly coloured woven blankets and sundry headwear, he finds a copy of Gulliver's Travels. Inside, a small stack of postcards, all addressed to Astrid Kano, in an elegant, long and educated hand, and signed, "Your son, Augustin." They're postmarked Tangier, Bavaria, Chefchaouen, Amsterdam, Marrakesh, and London, for the years 1996 to 1999. They are written in German and extremely succinct. Staffe delves deeper into the chest, finds a few papers scattered in the bottom. The writing is scrawled and difficult to read, and he sits at the table in the main room trying to translate. When he is done, he reads over what he has written in his own notebook. As the mountain skies are blue, so are your eyes, and the snow in spring, still your smile shines, and the autumn of the cherry sheds its blossoms, so my something heart bleeds. He squints at the missing word, can't make it out. He returns the papers to the chest and rummages in the bottom to see if he has missed anything. When he gets his head right inside, he can see that there are 2 photographs stuck where the side panel joints to the bottom. He pulls them out, sees a young Rubio and a dark-haired, large-featured woman with 60s lips and big hair in a short crocheted mini-dress. She and Rubio are sitting by a river. A picnic is spread out in front of them, and Rubio is holding a dark young boy with big limbs and a soft smile. Clearly a young Manolo, maybe 5 years old. The dark-haired woman has another child on her lap, younger and frail, fair and mischievous, pouting into camera. The second photograph shows a younger Edu and Jackson Roberts carrying a coffin. Behind them are 2 other figures, Rubio and someone totally obscured. In the background, Almacen's white houses slope away up the hill, like dropped cubes of sugar. A long train of people following the coffin, and turning the photograph over, he says, "Barrington?" There is the date of processing on the back in faded blue ink, the 21st of June, 1999. He looks at the photograph again and says aloud, "Edu," realizing that his friend claims to have had no time for the English painter. And he wonders who took the photograph. Staffe closes the cortijo's main door behind him, sets out to walk down the mountain, feeling that he has violated a privacy. Manolo's bultaco leans against the animal shelter, and Staffe wonders how far away Manolo might be by now. He listens for the sound of goats, hears nothing now. Sweat drips from Paolo's nose and chin. He watches Marie all the way as she goes into the wood to get beers from the acequia in the woods, which they use as a fridge. "You piss Jackson off," he hisses to Staffe. Staffe says to Paolo, "If I find you've been cheating on her with those sad hippie tarts, I had to get a bus back. Jackson took off after you stuck your oar in." Marie comes back, hands them their bottles and rubs her tummy. "Next week, so they reckon." "You should come down to the village and stay with me until the baby's born, just in case." "We're happy up here," says Paolo. Marie says, "All they can talk about in the village is that poor man who was killed. I went down with Harry today and it turned me right off, so morbid. And that cow in the bread shop was talking about Manolo. I couldn't make it out, just heard her say his name, and that curl she puts on her nasty mouth." "Do you ever hear them talk about Barrington?" asked Staffe. I get the impression the locals can't stand him. He got a couple of the girls in the way, so they say. You should ask Jackson. He must have known Barrington. What about Edu? I heard he had a sister who had a thing for Barrington, says Staffe. A thing for him? She had his child. What? That's what I heard in the doctor's surgery. She's not so well. Marie shakes her head and puts the palms of her hands flat to her tummy. I'm so excited. So pleased you'll be here when the baby comes. Will you? Says Paolo. I thought you were better. Isn't that why you went to Almeria? I'm sticking around, says Staffe, thinking about Edu, uncle to Barrington's bastard child, and when Marie goes up to the balsa behind the cortijo, calling Harry to come for something to eat, he says, Jackson knew Barrington all right. He carried the coffin at his funeral. It was probably because they were both Guiris. Paolo looks at Staffe from the corner of his hooded, dopey eye. A fellow Guiri, when all you want is to get away from them. Are you fed up of me being around, Paolo? I didn't know you were so interested in art. Paintings record history. They decorate walls. Up by the balsa, Marie hugs Harry. He rests his face on her swell. The sun dapples them, in a way Camille Pissarro might relate. Staffe says, It strikes me that Barrington is like the war round here. Nobody wants to talk about him. Paolo laughs. You can take the policeman out of the station. Just tell me what you know, Paolo. We're family, for God's sake. I can assure you, in all the years I've known Jackson... Paolo lets his words drift. A long plume of dust way below catches their eye. Ahead of it, a small red car kicks up the dust. It stops outside a cortijo. Whose place is that? Some English, the Harbinsons, not our Cappadarjeeling, says Paolo, and he chuckles to himself again. They're in deep shit. Gonna have to tear the playhouse down so everyone says it's illegal. Staffe churns over what Paolo had said earlier. In all the years I've known Jackson... How would Paolo have known Jackson before he came out here? Did Jackson find this cortijo for Paolo? Why would it suit Jackson to have Paolo here? He goes across to the telescope at the end of the terrace, turns it on the small red car. Beneath, at the Harbinsons, a young, dark-haired woman with oversized sunglasses knocks on the door. Seems to get no joy. Pepper paces around the property and stands on the edge of a deep ravine, where a crop terrace has collapsed. She starts punching away at her mobile phone. By the time Staffe gets back to the table, Maria's come back, and she and Paolo are having a row. It hushes. Marie says, We should ask Will. No! It's my land too, and he put the money up. Why do you undermine me? Says Paolo. Marie says, The water in the balsa is low again. Too low. But you're entitled, says Staffe. It's not coming through properly. Staffe says, You think someone's up to no good? No way, says Paolo. In any case, there's a stream runs through the wood, and it only needs a short channel to get it to the balsa. I could fill up and then shut it off again. Isn't that illegal? We're entitled, you said it yourself. You can't touch the water, says Harry, through the grilled window of his tiny bedroom. Ruben's father is chief of the water. They'll kill you. The water belongs to the village and to God. In that order, says Marie.
End of Disc 3.